Chapter 2494. Fire Phoenix Great Brahma snorted coldly, clenched his 6 arms into fists, and punched out. Boom! Terrifying shock waves exploded in the starry sky. Then, Great Brahma and the woman in white each retreated a few thousand steps and faced each other. The cultivators in the starry sky had already retreated far away when the two of them collided. The battle between two great experts of the life-comprehending realm, even if it was the aftermath of the battle, was still extremely terrifying to them. As long as they came into contact with the slightest bit of it, they would be blasted into dregs. Even experts like Magatama and Uezu didn't dare to get close to the battlefield and retreated far away. The power of the life enlightenment realm's mysterious life divine power was far stronger than that of cultivators below the life enlightenment realm. It wasn't something that cultivators below the life enlightenment realm could withstand, not even the aftermath. Bang, bang, bang. The white-dressed woman and Great Brahma's battle became more and more intense. Terrifying shock waves rippled outwards, forming circular ripples. Wherever they passed, the starry skies would explode and shatter like shattered glass. The starry sky exploded, forming a terrifying black hole. The powerful suction force sucked in the cultivators who were close to the black hole. The golden light and the white light suddenly merged together, and then the white-clothed woman and Great Brahma separated again. The onlookers were surprised to find that Great Brahma's injuries were more terrifying than the woman in white's. Clearly, Great Brahma had been at a disadvantage in the battle just now. So strong. Luotian came prepared this time, Uezu said with some surprise. Magatama also nodded and smiled bitterly. Uezu, don't forget Great Brahma's trump card. Uezu frowned and fell silent. Although she hoped that Luotian could win, she knew that the chances were not high. Great Brahma wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and stared gloomily at the white-clothed woman in front of him. He said coldly, I really didn't expect you to become so strong after making a comeback. If I'm not wrong, you're already at the peak of the life comprehension realm. You're not far from the death comprehension realm. Your talent is truly terrifying. The woman in white stood in the starry sky like a flawless white lotus. There was no enmity between us back then, and we could have even worked together to develop the Great Brahma domain. However, you were too selfish and couldn't see others doing well. You saw me advance to the life enlightenment realm, but you didn't want to develop together. Instead, you were afraid that I would threaten your position. You deserve to be discriminated against by the other lords. The woman in white ridiculed Great Brahma mercilessly. Back then, she had been ambushed and killed by Great Brahma for no reason. Furthermore, the Luotian palace had been destroyed. Luotian herself was the most depressed. Great Brahma's expression was somewhat ugly. Great Brahma was naturally displeased to be exposed like this by Luotian. Luotian, although your cultivation has improved and reached the peak of the life comprehension realm, do you think you are my opponent with just this little bit of cultivation? Great Brahma domain, Great Brahma above, Great Brahma's Brahma domain. This power became more and more turbulent, more and more surging. Then, Great Brahma's 30-foot body began to slowly expand. 10 feet, 100 feet, 1,000 feet, until 100,000 feet. At this moment, Great Brahma appeared extremely huge and eye-catching in the starry sky. Luotian was like an insignificant ant standing in front of Great Brahma at this moment. Especially at this moment, the aura on Great Brahma's body caused the hearts of many cultivators present to palpitate. How terrifying! Great Brahma domain's aura has surpassed the life enlightenment realm, right? Magatama said with a serious look. He used the origin of the heavenly domain. Uezu sighed. Uezu knew that once Great Brahma domain used the origin of the heavenly domain, Luotian wouldn't be Great Brahma domain's match unless she broke through the death enlightenment realm. Luotian's gaze turned serious. She knew about the origin of the heavenly domain. She came prepared this time. This body has a trace of the Phoenix bloodline. The Phoenix is a powerful race on par with the Dragon Clan. Moreover, the Phoenix is rarer than the Dragon Clan, and its power is even more terrifying. All these years, other than recovering my strength, I've also been developing the phoenix bloodline in this body. It's time to put it to use, Luotian muttered to herself. A spark ignited at the end of her fluttering sleeve. The spark was like a blazing fire. Luotian's petite body was immediately ignited by the red spark, turning into a boundless sea of fire. The surging flames continued to spread in the starry sky. Everything within a radius of 30,000 meters was enveloped by the flames. Afterwards, the invading flames began to slowly transform, forming a terrifying fire phoenix that was 30,000 meters tall. A clear bird cry resounded. Countless fire phoenixes formed by flames soared into the sky and pounced on Great Brahma Domain, who had transformed into a 10,000 feet tall giant. Great Brahma frowned slightly and snorted coldly. His 6 arms, which were as huge as mountains, suddenly clenched and smashed over. Golden light exploded and the starry sky trembled. Rumble. The two collided violently. Endless sparks flew. Each spark was dozens of feet tall, like a huge fireball. Bang! 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 At the moment of collision, the two continued to collide. Countless sparks formed a terrifying rain of fire. Many of the surrounding cultivators were caught off guard and were touched by the rain of fire. They were immediately burned to ashes. So strong. Since when did this Luotian become so strong? And that trump card of his is way too strong. To think that he can fight against Great Brahma, who has used the source of the heaven region to such an extent. Truly terrifying. Great Brahma Domain's face turned ugly. He realized that even if he used the origin power of the heavenly domain, he still couldn't take down Luotian. Moreover, the trump card that Luotian showed really shocked him. It was too terrifying. I'll kill you today. Great Brahma Domain snorted coldly. His 6 hands formed seals. The remaining gilded discs from the 61st to 64th floor of the Tower of Hanno trembled. Immediately, the gilded discs from the 61st to 63rd floor flew out and floated above Great Brahma Domain's head. However, the gilded discs from the 64th floor remained motionless. Great Brahma Domain was startled. However, with the enemy before him, he didn't think too much. He grabbed one of the gilded discs and threw it at the fire phoenix. The moment the gilded discs landed in front of the fire phoenix, a terrifying power erupted from the gilded discs, then exploded. Terrifying golden energy poured out and covered the fire phoenix. Suddenly, the fire phoenix let out a painful cry. It flapped its wings, and a powerful airflow swept out. It intended to disperse the golden energy produced by the explosion of the gilded discs. Chapter 2495. Star Monarch makes a move. The 2 gilded discs exploded again. The terrifying golden light completely covered the figure of the fire phoenix, and the fire phoenix let out an even more miserable cry. The explosion of the 3 gilded discs lasted for an hour before it gradually subsided. The golden light faded and the fire phoenix was no longer there. Instead, it was Luotian who was half kneeling in the starry sky. There were scattered flames around Luotian. These flames formed a layer of gauze that covered her body, preventing her from being completely annihilated by the terrifying explosion. Pucci! Luotian's face was pale as she spat out a mouthful of blood. Her beautiful eyes were filled with despair. Chen Shui, I'm sorry. I never thought that even using the Phoenix bloodline would fail. Luotian's eyes revealed an apologetic look. Over the years, she had attached a trace of her soul to Mu Qinshue's sea of consciousness. She had no ill intentions. She just wanted to seek revenge from Great Brahma. As long as she had her revenge, Luotian would redeem herself and would not harm Mu Qinshui in the slightest. But now, Luotian had miscalculated. She had come here, just as Zhuowen had solved the final puzzle of the Tower of Hanno, and completely opened it. And Great Brahma had relied on the power of the explosion of the Tower of Hanno to completely suppress the power of the Phoenix bloodline that Luotian had unleashed. If Luotian had not come for revenge at such a coincidental time, she might have succeeded. Unfortunately, Luotian had chosen the wrong time. In the sea of consciousness, Mu Chun Shui's soul fell silent. She sighed softly and said, I'm someone who has already died once. It's just that I can't accept it. I haven't seen my husband again. Luotian revealed a look of guilt, but she did not answer. She knew that this was her mistake, causing the two of them to be finished. Great Brahma stepped forward step by step. A giant palm grabbed Luotian in the palm of his hand. The three giant heads looked at Luotian in his hand and said, Luotian, if the Tower of Hanno hadn't been opened today, I might not have been your match. Unfortunately, your luck is too bad. You actually chose today to seek revenge. The heavens are really helping me. Great Brahma laughed complacently, but the killing intent in his eyes intensified. Luotian had always been a big worry in his heart. Back then, he thought that Luotian had been completely destroyed by him. Even if he hadn't, it was almost impossible for Luotian to make a comeback. However, he had never expected that not only had Luotian made a comeback, but she had also improved even further. Her strength had actually reached such a level. Now, Great Brahma only wanted to eliminate this future threat as soon as possible. Luotian's eyes were filled with disappointment. She had indeed miscalculated this time. She actually chose to appear at this time to take revenge on Great Brahma. Luotian, you can go in peace. This time, I will wipe out your physical body, soul, and sea of consciousness. Let's see if you can still make a comeback in the future. Great Brahma revealed a ferocious expression as he pinched Luotian's arm. Golden light exploded as terrifying energy poured into Luotian's delicate body, wanting to completely destroy Luotian's frail body. Moreover, this power was not only aimed at the physical body, but also at the deeper levels of the soul and the sea of consciousness. The intense pain caused Luotian to involuntarily look up to the sky and cry out in pain. As for Great Brahma, he let out a triumphant laugh. Bang! However, Great Brahma's smile only lasted for a moment before it completely stiffened, because the arm that was holding Luotian was separated from his body in an instant, and then it was violently thrown away. Boom! The last remaining gilded disc in the Tower of Hanno finally exploded at this moment. However, the moment the exploding golden light was about to spread out, it was completely enveloped by a powerful purple force. Then, under the dumbfounded gazes of everyone, the terrifying explosive energy produced by the gilded disc's self-destruction was completely shrunk into an indiscernible black spot under the purple force. Great Brahma's body stiffened. After his arm was blasted away by a mysterious force, he originally intended to take back the severed arm. But soon, he felt a terrifying aura firmly locked onto him. This aura contained peerless killing intent, cold and terrifying, causing Great Brahma to not dare to move at all, because he knew very well that once he took back the severed arm, the owner of this aura would mercilessly kill him. Who are you? Great Brahma looked in front of him with an ugly expression because after the gilded disc exploded, it was wrapped in a layer of purple mist. He could not see the true face of the person in the purple mist at all. However, Great Brahma had a guess in his heart. He knew that this purple mist was either Zhuoan or Crepe Myrtle Star. It can't be Crepe Myrtle Star, right? The surrounding cultivators were in an uproar. Everyone in Great Brahma knew that Crepe Myrtle Star was trapped in the Tower of Hanno. Now that the Tower of Hanno had shattered and such a strange figure had appeared, it was obvious that there was no one else but Crepe Myrtle Star. Whoosh! After the uproar from the crowd, a figure suddenly rushed out of the purple mist and rapidly rushed towards Great Brahma. Everyone saw that this figure had disheveled hair, and there were broken chains on all four limbs of his body. Obviously, this person should have been chained somewhere before, but now he had broken free. Great Brahma, you old bastard, this star will destroy you today. As soon as this strange person appeared, extreme lightning, extreme fire, and extreme wind surged out of his body. His every move was basically extreme energy. Boom! Great Brahma had already recovered his severed arm. Immediately, his 6 arms blasted out. Golden light soared into the sky like pillars of water, dyeing the entire starry sky golden yellow. The two collided hundreds of times in an instant and then retreated at the same time. Great Brahma retreated hundreds of steps, while the strange person retreated nearly 1,000 steps. Crepe Myrtle Star? Great Brahma's expression was very ugly. He stared at Crepe Myrtle Star as if he could not believe that he was still alive and had survived the 20th wind disaster to become a true third-level true god. Logically speaking, even if Crepe Myrtle Star was not killed by the explosion of the gilded disc on the last floor of the Tower of Hanno, he should have died under the 20th wind disaster. Great Brahma knew better than anyone how terrifying the 20th wind disaster was. It was definitely more powerful than the explosion of the gilded disc. But now, Crepe Myrtle Star appeared in front of him alive, and he seemed to be unharmed. Old bastard, you're stronger than before, but it doesn't matter. I have plenty of energy. Today I must take you down. Crepe Myrtle Star did not care that he was at a disadvantage in the battle just now. He had just reached the 3rd level and did not have good control of the power of the 3rd level. Chapter 2496. Head on your neck again. Before Great Brahma could react, Purple Star Sovereign's extreme Tao power spread throughout his body and attacked Great Brahma again. Great Brahma wanted to ask where Zhuan had gone, but unfortunately, Purple Star Sovereign didn't give him a chance to ask. Furthermore, Great Brahma was shocked to find that Purple Star Sovereign was getting stronger as the battle went on. In other words, he had a better grasp of the 3 extreme realms. Great Brahma had no choice but to take him seriously. As for Zhuan, he had long forgotten about him. It's actually Purple Star Sovereign. I really didn't expect him to advance to the 3 extreme realms. He's so powerful. This time, Great Brahma has really shot himself in the foot. He thought that he could use Crepe Myrtle Star-Lord, but he never expected that he would succeed. After everyone recognized Purple Star Sovereign, an uproar broke out like a tide. "Where's Zhuan?" Magatama whispered with a frown. Tong Chimay, who was standing behind Waning Moon, stared at the purple mist in the distant starry sky. She felt that there was another figure in the purple mist. Although her consciousness was basically blocked by the purple mist, she had a feeling that there was another person in the purple mist, and it was very likely that it was Zhuan. Luo Shun struggled out of the broken hand and looked gratefully at Purple Star Sovereign, who was fighting Great Brahma in the distance. Although she didn't know Purple Star Sovereign, he had saved her. She would remember this kindness in her heart. Although this person has advanced to the 3 extreme realms, I'm afraid he can't kill Great Brahma. I'm also seriously injured. I'm afraid I can't kill Great Brahma today. I can only wait for an opportunity in the future. Luotian planned to leave the starry sky. However, she soon discovered that the mysterious purple mist not far away had actually stretched out a large purple hand and pinched her. Luo Shun activated the mysterious life divine power in her body, but found that she couldn't break free from the terrifying purple hand. Then, the purple hand pulled her into the purple mist. Within the purple mist, there was a rather large space. In the center of the space, there was a cattail hassock. On the cattail hassock, a slender young man in white sat cross-legged. Behind the white-robed young man stood a black-robed young man. At that moment, the black-robed young man was surrounded by extremely terrifying extreme energy. Furthermore, his extreme energy was much more terrifying than Myrtle Star Star-Lords from before. The black-clothed youth held a golden pagoda-shaped artifact in his right hand. Upon closer inspection, this pagoda-shaped artifact was a miniature version of the Tower of Hanoi. "It's you." When Luotian's gaze fell on the face of the young man in white, she immediately opened her mouth wide and looked at the latter in disbelief. The young man in white slowly turned his head and smiled at the surprised Luotian. "We meet again. I wonder how my wife is doing." Luotian shuddered. Although the young man in white had a smile on his face, she could feel the deep coldness and strong, killing intent in his smile. "Your wife is doing very well. I didn't take over her body and chose to live in symbiosis. As long as I take my revenge, I will immediately send myself to the afterlife and will never harass Chen Shui again," Luotian hurriedly said. At this moment, Luotian's heart was filled with panic. The moment she saw the young man in white in front of her, she had already thought of the young man she met when she was in the cloudy, clear, round void. At that time, Zhuan was only at the void sky 7 steps. In her eyes, he was just an ant-like existence. Back then, he was an insignificant little fellow that she could destroy with a flip of her hand. But now, that ant from back then, just the killing intent he revealed was enough to make her heart skip a beat. Zhuan glanced at Luotian. Immediately, his powerful divine sense drilled into Luotian's forehead. Zhuan's divine sense was so powerful that it was comparable to the 2 extremes of life and death. Luotian's divine sense was indeed nothing in his eyes. After withdrawing his divine sense, Zhuan's expression eased quite a bit. Luotian did not lie. He had indeed found Chun Shui's divine sense in Luotian's divine sense. Moreover, Chun Shui's divine sense was quite strong, almost on par with Luotian's. Moreover, it was well preserved. However, Chun Shui's divine sense was currently sealed for some reason. This also meant that Mu Chun Shui's divine sense could sense the outside world, but she could not control her body. Right now, the control of her body was under the control of Luotian's divine sense. Are you serious? As long as you take your revenge, you'll immediately give control of your body to Chun Shui? Zhuan looked at Luotian with a strange gaze. Luotian seriously said, "Relax, Luotian, have already made a vow to the heavens. I will definitely keep my word." Zhuan nodded and slowly walked in front of Luotian. He reached out to gently stroke her soft hair and said in a gentle voice, "Chun Shui, as long as you can return, I will cut off Great Brahma's head for you." As soon as he finished speaking, Zhuan stomped his foot, causing the surrounding violet mist to suddenly surge. After that, the black-clothed Zhuan entered his main body. Instantly, Zhuan's aura rose steadily to an extremely terrifying level. "Wait for me." After Zhuan said this, he tore through the air, and the purple mist completely dissipated at this moment. Luotian watched his back as he left, and her beautiful eyes were filled with a complicated look. Pung! At this moment, Purple Star Sovereign was sent flying again. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth, and his face was slightly pale. Although Purple Star Sovereign had reached the 3 extreme realms, there was still a gap between him and Great Brahma, who had the source energy. Just as Crepe Myrtle was about to charge forward again, he was stopped by a palm. Purple Star Sovereign looked at Zhuan in confusion and said, "Brother Zhuan, what are you?" "Let me do it," Zhuan said with a faint smile. Purple Star Sovereign hesitated for a moment before nodding. Zhuan was much stronger than him. Moreover, it was thanks to the mysterious alchemy fire on Zhuan that he was able to survive the 20th storm. "Zhuan," Great Brahma looked at the white-clothed youth with a gloomy expression. His eyes were filled with killing intent. He knew that the reason why the Tower of Hanno failed was probably because of Zhuan. "Where's the source core in the Tower of Hanno?" Great Brahma asked coldly. "Are you talking about this?" Zhuan flipped his right hand, and the small Tower of Hanno appeared in his palm. "It's really with you. Bring it over." Great Brahma's eyes revealed a greedy look. He stomped his right foot and rushed toward Zhuan. His 6 arms blasted out one after another, spewing out golden light like a terrifying sun. Zhuan flipped his right hand again and put away the source core. Then he clenched his right hand into a fist. The 3 terrifying extreme energies of extreme lightning, extreme fire, and extreme wind began to condense on his fist, fusing into an even more mysterious power. "I promised my wife that I would make her appear in front of me again. The price is to take your head," Zhuan said softly as he stomped his left foot forward. Instantly, the surrounding starry sky collapsed with him as the center. Then his right fist followed the momentum of his body and blasted out, smashing heavily in front of Great Brahma. When Zhuan's fist landed in front of Great Brahma felt the pressure of death. This was the first time he had felt this pressure in countless years. Then he found that his limbs were slowly eroding away, and his body gradually disappeared. A blood-curdling scream rang out. Then, great Brahma's huge body collapsed and disappeared into nothingness. Only 3 huge heads were still floating in the starry sky. However, the eyes of the 3 heads had already lost their vitality. Chapter 2497. Taking over as the lord of the heavenly region with a wave of his sleeve, Zhuan tossed the 3 heads toward Luotian, who was still in a daze. Great Brahma is dead. Your revenge has been avenged. Zhuan's eyes were indifferent. After advancing to the 3 extreme realms, Zhuan's strength had increased by too much. Purple Star Sovereign only had the body of a human. After advancing to the 3 extreme realms, his strength was close to the enlightenment of Death Realm. On the other hand, Zhuan's clone was the Devourer King's body. With the Devourer King's body advancing to the 3 extreme realms, his strength naturally surpassed the enlightenment of Death Realm. Just the clone's strength alone was comparable to the 2 extreme realms of life and death. Moreover, this time, Zhuan had merged his clone with his main body. With the 2 of them combined, his strength had risen to a terrifying level. He was probably on par with Palace Master Wu Ju. In addition, Zhuan had attacked with his full strength. It would be strange if Great Brahma could block it. Luotian stared at the 3 heads in front of her in a daze. These 3 heads were the real Great Brahma's head. Luotian repeatedly used her divine sense to check, and found that Great Brahma's aura was indeed gone. Whether it was his body or soul, there was no trace of him. It was clear that Great Brahma's body and soul had been destroyed in the attack just now. After a long time, Luotian sighed and stood up. She bowed deeply to Zhuan and said, "Zhuan, thank you for avenging me." Zhuan calmly said, "Don't be mistaken. I didn't do it for you. I did it for my wife. Can you hand over control of the body to my wife now?" Luotian nodded and said, "If you want Shen Shui to regain control of the body, you have to expiate her soul. However, expiating her soul requires a very complicated ceremony." Zhuan nodded and said, "All right. After I'm done with my matters here, I'll find a quiet place for you." Luotian cupped her hands at Zhuan and said gratefully, "Thank you." Zhuan nodded and didn't say anything. That was because the surrounding cultivators were gathering around them. The people at the front were all familiar to Zhuan. They were Elder Waning Moon and Tong Chimei from Half Moon Hall. However, there was a tall woman in moon-white robes standing in front of them. Zhuan guessed that this tall lady should be the Half Moon Hall's ancestor, Yuezu. As for the 3 people beside the Half Moon Hall, Zhuan knew all of them. They were Magatama, Mo Ji, and Yushan from the Heavenly Devil Island. "Brother Zhua, I didn't expect you to be so powerful when you returned to the Great Brahma domain after so many years." Magatama hurriedly stepped forward and greeted Zhuan. However, his eyes were filled with complicated emotions. As for Mose and Yushan, who were following behind Emotian, they became extremely uneasy. Their gazes towards Zhua also became somewhat evasive. Thinking about how Zhuan's cultivation base was similar to theirs back then, but now he could already kill the Great Brahma domain, the 2 of them didn't know how to greet him. Zhuan nodded slightly at Emoji and Yushan as a form of greeting. From Emoji and Yushan's expressions, Zhuan could still see their concerns. In the past, the difference in cultivation base between them wasn't that great, so they could become good friends. However, the gap in cultivation base between them was huge now. Zhuan naturally didn't mind the difference in cultivation base. However, Emoji and Yushan were clearly a little cautious and minded it. However, Zhuan didn't say much. This matter couldn't be forced. "Greetings, Brother Zhua." Yuezu led Elder Waning Moon and Tong Chimei to hurriedly greet Zhuan. There was a hint of eagerness in his tone. An expert who could kill the Great Brahma domain was someone they didn't dare to take lightly. Zhuan smiled slightly at Tong Chimei. The latter's expression was calm. She also nodded at Zhuan, but didn't say anything. "Brother Zhua, you should be the one who solved the puzzle in the Tower of Hanno, right?" Yuezu suddenly asked Zhuan. Zhuan nodded and didn't deny it. Only he and the Crepe Myrtle Star had come out of the Tower of Hanno. However, He was much stronger than the crepe myrtle star. Apart from Zhuowen, there really couldn't be a second person. Then, the heavenly domain origin hidden in the Tower of Hanno is also in your hands. Yuezu asked again. Zhuowen narrowed his eyes and glanced at Yuezu. He thought that Yuezu really knew a lot. However, he didn't intend to hide it and just nodded. With the strength that Zhuowen had displayed, there were very few people in the Great Brahma domain who could be his match. Not to mention the Great Brahma domain, there were probably only a handful of people in the entire 8 heavens who could pose a threat to him. Yuezu's eyes were filled with excitement. He immediately looked at Zhuowen seriously and knelt on one knee. Brother Zhuo, since you have obtained the Great Brahma domain origin and defeated the Great Brahma domain, you are the new ruler of the Great Brahma domain. I hope you can take over the position of ruler of the Great Brahma domain. Yuezu's voice was very loud, and all the cultivators present heard it clearly. To Zhuowen's surprise, after Yuezu made this request, these cultivators actually followed suit and knelt on one knee on the ground, begging Zhuowen to take over as the new ruler of the heavenly domain. Zhuowen, the Great Brahma domain, is the weakest of the 8 great heavens domains. Originally, there was only one Great Brahma who reached the void sky 9th step, but because of Great Brahma's selfishness, the development of the entire heaven domain and the production of experts was limited. Now that you have killed the Great Brahma domain, the Great Brahma domain cannot be without a ruler, Magatama also hurriedly said. Zhuowen frowned and said, I am not a cultivator of the Great Brahma domain. It is not appropriate for me to take over as the ruler of the heavenly domain. Brother Magatama or Yuezu are both good candidates. It may not necessarily be me. Yuezu shook his head and said, Zhuowen, you may not know, but only a cultivator who has reached the 9 steps void sky is qualified to take over as the ruler of the heavenly domain. Otherwise, the entire heavenly domain will be discriminated against by the other heavens and be bullied by the cultivators of the other heavens. The ruler of the heavenly domain is the symbol of every heavenly domain. If the cultivation of the ruler of the heavenly domain is very low, the cultivators of the entire heavenly domain will not be able to raise their heads. At this point, Yuezu looked at Zhuowen and said sincerely, originally, the cultivation of the Great Brahma domain was the lowest among the rulers of the 8 heavens. Now, if the chosen ruler of the heavenly domain is not even at the 9 steps void sky, the Great Brahma domain will really exist in name only. The Moon Ancestor's words immediately caused the rest of the cultivators to agree. Thinking of the powerful strength that Zhuowen had just displayed, many of the cultivators present were already very convinced of Zhuowen. They couldn't wait for Zhuowen to take over as the lord of the heavenly region of the Great Brahma domain. Zhuowen pondered for a moment and finally decided to agree. He still needed to understand the secrets of the 8 heavens, so he had to search for the Great Brahma Palace. He had killed the Great Brahma domain and did not agree to become the ruler of the Great Brahma domain. If he forcibly searched for the Great Brahma Palace, it would probably attract the opposition of the other cultivators. Chapter 2498. Self-Transcendence. After Zhuowen agreed to take over as the lord of the Great Brahma domain, the surrounding cultivators cheered. In fact, many cultivators in the Great Brahma domain were unhappy with Great Brahma's actions over the years. However, Great Brahma was the strongest person in the Great Brahma domain and the ruler of the heaven domain. They didn't dare to say anything openly. Now that Great Brahma had been overthrown, they were naturally celebrating. They let Zhuowen take over as the lord of the Great Brahma domain. Other than Zhuowen destroying Great Brahma, it was also because of Zhuowen's powerful strength. Domain Lord, do you have any suggestions for our Great Brahma domain now? Magatama immediately changed the way he addressed Zhuowen when he saw that Zhuowen had agreed to take over the Great Brahma domain. Zhuowen thought for a moment and said, I've been to other heavenly domains and found that the Great Brahma domain's starry sky energy is the thinnest. Of course, I don't think this is the main reason why the Great Brahma domain is so far behind the other heavenly domains. The main reason is that the previous lord of the heavenly domain, Great Brahma, was stagnant and didn't want to improve. In the end, the gap between the Great Brahma domain and the other heavenly domains widened. Yuezu's beautiful eyes lit up. She looked at Zhuowen and said respectfully, "Domain Lord, do you have any better suggestions?" Zhuowen said in a deep voice, "The starry sky energy near the Great Brahma Palace is the densest in the entire heavenly domain. However, there aren't many people in the Great Brahma Palace. Furthermore, the Great Brahma Palace doesn't recruit any disciples and doesn't allow other forces to enter the vicinity of the Great Brahma Palace. This also causes the space in the core area to be wasted." At this point, Zhuowen paused for a moment and continued, "From now on, other forces are allowed to enter the vicinity of the Great Brahma Palace. However, if they want to obtain the right to enter, they will have to hold a competition between forces. According to the ranking, the positions of each force will be arranged." After Zhuowen finished speaking, the surroundings were in an uproar. Many cultivators with low cultivation were indignant. In their opinion, this arrangement was too unfair. After all, most of the cultivators came from small forces. According to the division of forces, the good positions would definitely be taken by the large forces. They wouldn't even be able to get a share of the soup. Zhuowen calmly looked at the surrounding cultivators. He had expected such a situation to occur, so he continued, "However, I will add a condition. I will build a cultivation ground in the Great Brahma Heaven Palace. Anyone who contributes to the Great Brahma Heaven Palace will be rewarded with contribution points. Then, any cultivator can enter the Great Brahma Heaven Palace to cultivate." Hua. As soon as Zhuowen's suggestion appeared, an uproar instantly arose in the surroundings, surging like a surging tide. No one expected Zhuowen to build a cultivation ground in Great Brahma Heaven Palace and open it to all cultivators in the heaven domain. Realm domain. Was to heaven domain, domain ruler realm master. The Great Brahma Palace was the place where the ruler of the heaven realm resided. It gathered the densest and richest energy in the entire Great Brahma domain. Cultivating in the Great Brahma Palace would definitely be many times faster than cultivating in other places. "Domain Lord, are you sure you want to announce this rule?" Yuezu asked excitedly. Zhuowen's measure was not only helpful to small forces. It was also very helpful to a huge force like the Half Moon Palace. Moreover, this measure emphasized fairness. "Yes, regarding the competition between forces, I will have to trouble Magatama and Yuezu. I still have some matters to deal with." Zhuowen cupped his fist towards Yuezu and Magatama. Then, he led Ziwei Star Lord and Luoshin into the Great Brahma Palace. The new domain lord is indeed much better than the previous Great Brahma domain. He even opened up the Great Brahma Palace. How big of a heart does he need to have? Yes, this way, rogue cultivators like us will also have the opportunity to cultivate in the Great Brahma Palace. I know that cultivating in the Great Brahma Palace for a day is equivalent to cultivating in the outside world for a year. It can be seen that the energy in the Great Brahma Palace is much denser than the outside world. I really want to go in and cultivate now. Don't be delusional. It's already good enough that the domain lord opened it up. Once the measures are implemented, you have to work hard to earn contribution points. There was a lot of discussion in the surroundings. Magatama and Yuezu looked at each other and went to prepare for the competition. Both of them had a premonition that the Great Brahma domain would be revitalized in Zhuowen's hands. When Zhuowen entered the Great Brahma Palace, his eyes were filled with shock. What rich energy! How can the energy in the Great Brahma Palace be so dense? Zhuowen's eyes flashed with a strange light. The energy in the Great Brahma Palace may be much weaker than the energy in the ninth heaven on the other side of the Gate of Profundity, but it was much denser than the heaven lords of the other heavens. Did you notice? The reason why the Great Brahma Palace is so rich in energy is because the Great Brahma domain once excavated many starry sky divine veins. All the starry sky divine veins found in the Great Brahma domain were taken away by the Great Brahma domain and placed inside the Great Brahma Palace creating the current Great Brahma Palace. Luotian sneered and continued. Back then, the Luotian Palace in the far west was destroyed because it opposed the Great Brahma Domain's approach, which led to a huge conflict between the far west and the Great Brahma Domain. Zhuowen said, so the reason why the Great Brahma Domain's energy is so scarce is also because of the Great Brahma Domain? Yes, the Great Brahma Domain is selfish and only cares about the benefits in front of him. He can sacrifice the benefits of the entire heaven domain. This is also the main reason why the Great Brahma Domain is so unpopular in the heaven domain, Luotian said. Zhuowen shook his head. In his opinion, the Great Brahma Domain's approach was too stupid. If the Great Brahma Domain could win the hearts of the people, Zhuowen would have to face the condemnation of the entire heaven domain if he killed the Great Brahma Domain today. Although he, Zhuowen, would still be fine, at least his reputation and status would be severely damaged. It would be even more impossible for him to become the new heaven lord of the Great Brahma Domain. The Great Brahma Palace was very spacious. There weren't many rooms inside, but the central hall was incomparably huge. In front of the hall, there was a flight of stairs. At the top of the stairs was a magnificent seat. This should be the place where the Great Brahma Domain usually sat. Zhuowen walked into the hall and looked at Luotian without saying a word. Luotian gave a self-deprecating smile. She knew what Zhuowen meant and said, "Don't worry, protect me. I will now begin to transcend myself. It will take 49 days, and I will not be disturbed during this period. At that time, Chun Shui will regain control of her body and inherit her cultivation." Chapter 2499. When Shui Gong Goddess Luo nodded, she reached out her slender hand and took out many materials from her spirit ring. Zhuowen even saw the blood of some kind of beast and some strange talismans. He knew that these should be the materials for Goddess Luo's ritual. Luotian waved her hand, and a fiery red flame shot out from her hand. This flame enveloped all the materials in the surroundings. When the surrounding materials were all burned in a gas by the flames, the fiery red flames turned blood red. Clearly, these materials had been integrated into the flames. So, the blood red flame wrapped around Goddess Luo. Goddess Luo laid on the ground with her eyes closed. Zhuowen placed a restriction around Goddess Luo to protect her from being disturbed by the outside world. Of course, Zhuowen's divine sense was constantly paying attention to Goddess Luo's sea of consciousness. As long as he found out that Goddess Luo had any evil intentions, he would immediately stop the ritual and destroy her. Fortunately, Zhuowen did not find any strange movements from Goddess Luo after observing for a long time. Moreover, in his divine sense, Goddess Luo's sea of consciousness did not touch the other half of Chun Shui's divine soul. Instead, Goddess Luo's divine soul was wrapped in the power of the ritual and was slowly dispersing. This dispersing speed was very slow. To Goddess Luo, there was no pain at all. Instead, it was much more peaceful. 49 days passed very quickly. Zhuowen basically guarded Goddess Luo. His divine sense did not relax for a moment. He was always paying attention to Goddess Luo's sea of consciousness. Purple Star Monarch sat on the side with a yawn, cultivating in boredom. Actually, he was just putting on an act. After breaking through the three extremes, the road ahead was completely confusing to him. He did not know what the road after the three extremes was. If I knew that there was a Tao-confirming realm, I wouldn't have chosen the three extremes even if I died. Now that I've reached the three extremes, I'm even more confused than before. Damn it. Crepe Myrtle Star, Sovereign muttered in frustration. The three extreme realms were originally an alternative cultivation method. It was not mature at all, so Crepe Myrtle Star Sovereign did not know how to continue cultivating. Now, apart from consolidating his three extremities and familiarizing himself with the fusion and utilization of extremities, Myrtle Star Monarch couldn't cultivate at all. Suddenly, a soft explosion interrupted Crepe Myrtle Star Sovereign's train of thought. Luotian, who had been motionless all this time, finally moved. The blood-red flames around Luo Shun dissipated, and Luo Shen slowly opened her eyes. When Zhuowen saw the look in Luoshan's eyes, he shuddered and revealed a look of excitement. He was all too familiar with this gaze. It was Mu Qinshue's gaze. Chun Shui. Zhuowen's voice became a bit hoarse as he softly called out. Mu Qinshue's eyes were filled with confusion at first, but then she heard the familiar hoarse voice. She subconsciously turned her head and saw the face she had been thinking about day and night. "Husband," Mu Qinshui softly said and threw herself into Zhuowen's arms, tears of excitement flowing out of her eyes. Hugging Mu Qinshui's delicate body and smelling the fragrance of her body, Zhuowen was extremely satisfied. The two hugged each other without saying a word, quietly feeling each other. Looks like I have to leave." Crepe Myrtle Star Sovereign's mouth twitched. He found an excuse and ran out of the hall. After a long time, Zhuowen placed his hands on Mu Qinshui's shoulders and sighed. "I'm sorry. I let Luoshan take advantage of the situation." Mu Qinshui shook her head and said, "Husband, it's not your fault. I can only blame myself for being too weak. Moreover, Luoshan is a pretty good person. She didn't forcefully take over my body, but used a symbiotic method. Moreover, my cultivation realm has also advanced to the life comprehension realm with Sister Luoshan's help." Zhuowen nodded. Mu Qinshui wasn't without benefits. At least her cultivation had been raised by Mu Qinshui. Especially the Phoenix bloodline that Mu Qinshui had displayed before, its power was terrifying. Zhuowen knew that with Luoshan's help, Mu Qinshui's Phoenix bloodline was much stronger than before. It's a pity that Sister Luoshan has already transcended. Mu Qinshui was a little sad. Zhuowen was a little embarrassed and said, "If Luoshan doesn't transcend, how can you take control of your body?" Mu Qinshui shook her head and said, "Actually, Sister Luoshan doesn't need 49 days to transcend. The reason why she did it was all for me. Those materials from before were to completely awaken the Phoenix bloodline in my body and consolidate my cultivation realm. If I'm not wrong, my cultivation is already half a step into the death comprehension realm. As long as I comprehend the profound death divine energy, I can break through the death comprehension realm." Zhuowen's eyes revealed a look of understanding. He finally knew why Luoshan had to do this ceremony. It was to compensate Mu Qinshui. Thinking of his bad attitude towards Luoshan, Zhuowen felt a little guilty. He knew that he had wronged Luoshan. Is there any leeway to persuade her to stay? Zhuowen smiled bitterly. Mu Qinshui shook her head and gently said, "No, but this was something that Sister Luoshan did of her own free will. She no longer had any attachment to this world, and only her hatred for Lord Brahma kept her going. Now that Lord Brahma is dead, her wish has been fulfilled, so..." Zhuowen nodded. Mu Qinshui was right. When Luoshan was transcending, her expression was indeed calm and gentle. Zhuowen and Mu Qinshui were affectionate for a while more. Then, Purple Star Sovereign ran in from outside Brahma Palace. "Brother Zhuo, the tournament of forces has been arranged. Yuezu and Magatama are waiting outside the palace for your instructions," Purple Star Sovereign said. "Okay, I'll go out now." Zhuowen walked out of Brahma Palace with Mu Qinshui. He immediately noticed that the starry sky in front of Brahma Palace was filled with countless cultivators. Looking carefully, these cultivators were all in their own camps. They were scattered into small regions. Obviously, each region represented a different force. When Zhuowen appeared outside Brahma Palace, he immediately attracted the attention of countless forces. Then, Dokyo involuntarily cast a fearful gaze at Zhuowen. "Territorial Lord, we have prepared all the preparations for the tournament of forces according to your instructions. I wonder if Territorial Lord has any orders or requests for this tournament?" Yuezu asked respectfully. Zhuowen nodded and said indifferently, "I'll have to trouble Yuezu in Magatama. My Brahma Palace will be renamed Wenshui Palace. Are the two of you willing to become the left and right guardians of Wenshui Palace? In the future, you can freely enter Wenshui Palace and cultivate inside." Chapter 2500. Secret, Let the tournament of forces begin. After deciding that Magatama and Uezu would be the left and right protectors of the One Snow Palace, Zhuon announced the start of the tournament of forces to the cultivators below. Magatama and Uezu were very responsible and began to take care of the matters related to the tournament of forces. They had already made the preparations for the tournament of forces. Now that Zhuon had announced the start of the tournament of forces, the two of them began to deal with the matters of the tournament of forces in an orderly manner. Zhuon stood on the steps of the One Snow Palace and watched the tournament of forces being carried out in an orderly manner. He nodded to himself. The tournament of forces that Magatama and Uezu had organized was quite perfect. There were basically no flaws, and Zhuon was quite satisfied with it. The tournament of forces was nothing more than the selection of outstanding disciples from each force. They would compete in the arena, and the rules were naturally an elimination system. 3 days later, the tournament of forces finally came to an end. The corresponding ranking of the forces was also selected. The first place was naturally the Half Moon Palace. The second place was the Heavenly Devil Island. The third, fourth, and fifth places were the Qi Refining Sword Sect, White Jade Tower, and Flower Butterfly Valley, respectively. These 5 forces were originally the forces of the 10 great sects in the Great Brahma Domain. They were among the top among the countless forces in the Great Brahma Domain. As for the remaining 5 of the 10 great sects, such as the Heaven and Earth Sect and Void Sect, they had already been eliminated before Zhuon left the Great Brahma Domain. Uezu and Magatama arranged for the people from their respective forces to arrange the selected sects and arrange the corresponding residences for these sections. As for the forces that were eliminated, they were somewhat depressed. However, they quickly regained their composure and became even more enthusiastic. This was because they knew that the new ruler of the Sky region was planning to build a public cultivation area in the One Snow Palace to provide them with a better cultivation environment. Of course, if one wished to enter the One Shui Palace to train, one would naturally need a corresponding amount of contribution points. The One Shui Palace would naturally announce the contribution point system after the public training grounds were established. Magatama, Uezu, the construction of the cultivation area will depend on you. You can do whatever you want with the main hall in the center of the One Snow Palace. That's right, Chen Shui. I'll leave the supervision matter to you. Zhuon suddenly turned to look at Mu Qinshui beside him and said this in a gentle voice. Mu Qinshui revealed a faint smile and said, Qinshui, I will take care of the supervision matter, Qinshui. Also, Big Sister Luotian once told me that most of the secrets of Great Brahma Heaven are kept in an extremely sealed room. That room is located in the deepest part of Great Brahma Heaven Palace. You can take a look there. Shui shui chun chun shui 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 yi shui 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 chin chun chun shui 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 yi. Is there a need to thank me between us? Mu Qinshui said as she rolled her eyes at Zhuon. Zhuon gave a laugh and gave Mu Qinshui a fierce kiss. Then he walked into the depths of the One Snow Palace while laughing. Only Mu Qinshui was left with a red face as she stomped her feet. The surrounding cultivators were all secretly laughing in their hearts. Brat, about Moyan Wushang, aren't you going to tell that girl? The thunder fire sword flew out of the spirit ring on its own. Xiaohei sat on the sword's hilt and spoke in a rare, serious tone. The spirit ring was personally refined by Zhuon. It had already been set by Zhuon so that Xiaohei could freely enter and exit the spirit ring. So, every time Xiaohei left the spirit ring, she did not need Zhuon's permission. The smile on Zhuon's face faded. He sighed softly and said, Let's talk about this when I leave the Great Brahma Domain for the Huaxia Domain. Let's wait until the matters in the Great Brahma Domain are settled. Hearing Zhuon's words, Xiaohei remained silent. After a while, Zhuon came to the deepest part of the One Snow Palace. At the end of the depths, he saw a simple and unadorned door. The surface of this door was flowing with light and vibrant colors. It was obvious that a powerful restriction had been set up. Zhuon's current divine sense was extremely powerful. Moreover, his array Tao level was not low. He immediately saw that the surface of this door was a combination of a level 8 concealment array and a level 8 defense array. After observing for a moment, Zhuowen began to crack this hybrid array. Soon, the array was completely cracked. Opening the door, Zhuowen found that behind the door was a spacious study. There were rows of desks in the study, and many ancient books were placed on top of them. Zhuowen's divine sense swept out, and the contents of the books in the study appeared in his mind at a glance. What made Zhuowen speechless was that the books in here were all mortal books. He did not know why the Great Brahma domain wanted to collect mortal books in the Great Brahma Palace. After carefully scanning, Zhuowen found a black jade slip in an iron-bound book at the bottom of the bookshelf in the deepest part of the study. Zhuowen took a step forward, took out the iron-bound book, opened it, and took out the black jade slip inside. The surface of this iron-bound book actually has a layer of restriction that shields divine sense. If my divine sense was not strong enough, I would not have discovered that there was such a black jade slip in this iron-bound book. Zhuowen muttered in a low voice. Immediately, his divine sense drilled into the black jade slip and began to carefully read the contents of the jade slip. After reading it, Zhuowen put down the jade slip, and his eyes began to become dignified and serious. This jade slip was left by the Great Brahma domain. It records the secrets of the 8 heavens and also introduces the higher-level heavens outside the 8 heavens. They don't know the name of the heavens, so they call it the 9th heaven. In the introduction of the jade slip, there's only one way to go from the 8 heavens to the 9th heaven, and that is to cross the outer space and go to the end of the endless starry sky. At the other end of the heavenly chasm is the real 9th heaven. Over the countless years, many Tao-confirming powerhouses have left the 8 heavens, and most of them left through this heavenly chasm. Moreover, it is said that this heavenly chasm is extremely dangerous. Even a real Tao-confirming powerhouse has the risk of dying in the heavenly chasm, and the two extremes of life and death are extremely dangerous. This jade slip also mentioned the origins of the 8 heavens. The origins of the 8 heavens are not the heaven-breaking origin, but the heavenly Tao origin bred by the heavenly Tao. Zhuowen frowned slightly. There is not much information about the heavenly Tao origin in this jade slip. It is said that this thing is necessary for Tao-confirming cultivators. If one doesn't have enough heavenly Tao origin, even if they can comprehend it, the failure rate of Tao-confirming is very high. In the 9th heaven, the heavenly Tao origin is very easy to buy, but in the 8 heavens, it is extremely rare. It is said that when the 8 heavens were just born, there are also many heavenly Tao origins. Many cultivators relied on the heavenly Tao origin to successfully confirm their Tao and become Tao-confirming powerhouses. However, after these Tao-confirming powerhouses successfully confirmed their Tao, they left the 8 heavens and went to the 9th heaven. This also caused the heavenly Tao origin in the 8 heavens to be constantly consumed. In the end, only the heavenly Tao origin was left, which was hidden deep in the hands of the heavenly lords of the 8 heavens. After reading it, Zhuowen revealed a thoughtful look. He recalled the door of profundity in the 6 desires heavenly domain. On the other side of the Gate of Wonders, there's a starry sky energy that is far richer than that of the 8 heavens. He has always guessed that it is the 9th heaven. Chapter 25:01 Starry Sky, Divine Vein. Apart from the 9th heaven, where else could it be? Zhuowen shook his head, thinking that he was being too sensitive. He actually suspected that the other side of the door of profundity wasn't the 9th heaven. If I want to go to the 9th heaven, it's best to go through the door of profundity. In Zhuowen's opinion, the door of profundity is much safer than the heavenly moat. Leaving the 8 heavens through the door of profundity should be the safest way. It's just that Zhuowen is worried that Sakyamuni and the others have already discovered the door of profundity. Did they also enter the other side of the barrier? Of course, Zhuowen isn't surprised that Sakyamuni and the others entered the other side of the barrier. What he is mainly worried about is that Sakyamuni and the others will seal the place where the door of profundity is located. Now, Zhuowen's strength had indeed improved a lot, but Sakura's side had the Lords of Six Heavens. If these Lords of Six Heavens were to join forces to lay down the seal, Zhuowen himself didn't have the confidence to break it. What Zhuowen doesn't know is that the other side of the door of profundity is even more dangerous than the heavenly moat. Putting away the jade slip, Zhuowen checked the study again. This time, he checked more carefully. After entering the great Brahma heavenly palace, Zhuowen hasn't seen any resources. He doesn't believe that the dignified great Brahma heavenly palace doesn't have anything in his palace. All of a sudden, Zhuowen let out a soft cry of surprise. Soon after, his divine sense landed on the last row of bookshelves. He discovered a small magic array at the bottom. This array was drawn with blood. Due to the passage of time, the dried blood stains were a little black. Concealment array. Zhuowen waved his sleeve and put the last row of bookshelves aside. He looked at the blood-red array under his feet solemnly. This blood-red formation wasn't an ordinary concealment formation. Instead, it was drawn with one's own blood essence and could only be unraveled with the corresponding blood essence. Furthermore, this array formation was emitting a faint, ominous aura. Zhuowen knew that if he made a mistake in his method of unlocking it, this blood-red array formation would most likely unleash some sort of attack. Zhuowen sneered. His divine sense turned into a storm and slammed into the blood-red array. Instantly, the blood-red array was activated. Then, the blazing blood-red light turned into a ferocious, blood-red beast that suddenly rushed toward Zhuowen. Soul kill. Zhuowen sneered and immediately used the soul kill technique. In an instant, his divine sense turned into a monstrous killing intent. The moment the blood mutant beast came into contact with this divine sense killing intent, it collapsed. However, this blood-red formation was clearly unusual. The moment the blood-red beast collapsed, several more blood-red beasts appeared, and each one was stronger than the last. If an ordinary life enlightenment stage cultivator encountered this blood-red formation, they would definitely be in an extremely difficult situation. Unfortunately, the one they encountered was Zhuowen. Although his cultivation wasn't high, his divine sense was too terrifying. It was comparable to the life and death stage experts. These blood-red beasts were all completely annihilated by Zhuowen using the soul kill technique. When the last blood-red beast was finally killed by Zhuowen, the blood-red formation collapsed and a dark cave appeared under Zhuowen's feet. Zhuowen's eyes narrowed slightly. He controlled his body and slowly descended into the dark cave. When he landed at the bottom, his eyes revealed a look of vigilance. His divine sense radiated out and paid attention to the surroundings. But soon, he found that his vigilance was completely unnecessary. What appeared in front of him was a space similar to a natural cave. In front of this space, Zhuowen saw many starry sky divine veins. These starry sky divine veins were all top-grade starry sky divine veins. None of them were inferior. There were too many starry sky divine veins. They were intertwined like tree roots deep in the soil. No wonder the great Brahma Palace's starry sky energy is so rich. It turns out that there are so many starry sky divine veins under the great Brahma Palace. Zhuowen looked at the many starry sky divine veins in front of him and couldn't help but be shocked. This was definitely the largest number of starry sky divine veins he had ever seen. He had a lot of starry sky divine veins, but compared to the starry sky divine veins under the great Brahma Palace, they were simply dwarfed. In the middle of these complex starry sky divine veins, there was a passage that only one person could pass through. This passage should have been opened by the great Brahma Palace. Zhuowen followed this passage and walked towards the depths of the starry sky divine veins. When he reached the deepest part of the starry sky divine veins, there was a space the size of a football field. This space was completely opened up by countless starry sky divine veins. Moreover, the starry sky energy here was many times richer than in the great Brahma heavenly palace. Zhuan even saw a praying mat here. At the same time, he saw piles of resources around the space. These resources included divine herbs, divine pills, divine weapons, and various materials for refining weapons and elixirs. There's actually a passage in this space? Zhuan found another passage at the end of this space. Without thinking, he went in and found a similar space at the end of the passage. In this similar space, Zhuan naturally saw another passageway, as well as many cultivation resources. Thus, Zhuan followed the passageways one after another, finding one space after another. When he stopped at the last space, he found that there were a total of 108 spaces inside the starry sky, divine veins. Each space had a lot of resources. This was definitely the most resources Zhuan had ever seen. It was obvious that the great Brahma Palace had collected a lot of resources over the years. The Ryuka people can cultivate in the starry sky divine veins in the future, Zhuan said with a burning gaze. However, when he thought about the size of the Ryuka people, he knew that there wasn't enough space. I'll let my avatar cultivate here and use the devouring power to absorb all the starry sky energy into my inner world. This way, the Ryuka people should be able to benefit from it. Zhuan calmed down and murmured softly. With this thought, Zhuan ordered his avatar to store all the resources in his inner world. Of course, some of the divine herbs, divine pills, and materials that were useful to Zhuan were left in his spiritual ring. The Ryuka people in his inner world obviously felt the sudden increase in starry sky energy. Many of them were chanting Zhuan's name. After doing all this, 3 days passed unknowingly. Zhuan walked out of the study and found Crepe Myrtle Star, Mu Chinshua, Yuezu, and Magatama waiting for him in the main hall. Husband, the arrangements have been made for the forces that have qualified for the Tournament of Forces. Yuezu and Magatama would like to discuss the cultivation space with you. Chapter 2502. Apricot Flower Villageowan hugged Muchinshua, then looked at Magatama and used, "You don't need to ask me about the cultivation area, just build it according to your own ideas. Also, I have already given the information about the contribution point system to Magatama. When the time comes, you just need to follow his instructions. My wife and I will be leaving for a period of time, so I'll leave the Winshui Palace to you. Also, while I'm away, Brother Ziwei will replace me and take over the position of the Heaven Domain Lord." Magatama and Yuezu quickly bowed in response, but they felt helpless in their hearts. This Zhuan was clearly the Heaven Domain Lord, but he was the most carefree one, basically being a hands-off shopkeeper. However, the two of them quite liked Zhuan's method of free rearing. After saying this, Zhuan hugged Mu Chunshua's slender waist and left the Winshui Palace. Ziwei Star Monarch secretly muttered, "It's good to be young." After leaving the Winshui Palace, Zhuan immediately took out the space-time wheel and flew in a certain direction. 3 days later, Zhuan stopped at an extremely beautiful star field. This star field was multicolored, and it looked dazzling and beautiful. "Husband, where is this?" Mu Chinshua looked at this beautiful star field in surprise. Zhuan landed on majestic mountain peak. Hugging Mu Chinshua, smelling the latter's fragrance, he said, "Chinshui, I want to accompany you during this period of time. Below this mountain peak, there's a small village. Let's be like a normal husband and wife, working at sunrise and resting at sunset." Mu Chinshua hugged Zhuan's neck and said softly, "Husband, do you have something to do?" Mu Chinshua understood Zhuan very well. She knew that Zhuan wanted to accompany her at this moment. It should be a kind of compensation. In other words, after accompanying her this time, Zhuan would definitely have to go on a long trip. Zhuan looked at Mu Chinshua and said with a sigh, "Yes, after the matters in the great Brahma domain come to an end, I need to make a trip to the infinite Taishu of the Hua, Xia Heavenly Domain. It's about Wushang." Zhuan slowly told Mu Chinshua everything that happened in the Six Desires Heavenly Domain, as well as Mo Yin Wushang's transformation into Desireless. Zhuan looked at Mu Chinshua in silence. Finally, he said, "Chen Shui, thank you." Muchinshue shook her head. Her beautiful eyes fell on the small village at the foot of the mountain. She said with a smile, "We have been married for so many years, but we haven't had the chance to experience the life of a husband and wife. You are mine now." Zhuan said with a smile, "Of course." Apricot Blossom Village was a village that was isolated from the rest of the world. Apricot Blossom Village wasn't very big. There were only 100 families inside. The closest town to Apricot Blossom Village was half a day's journey away. Other than that, Apricot Blossom Village was surrounded by green mountains and clear waters. The environment was beautiful and tranquil. On this day, an ordinary couple came to Apricot Blossom Village. The man had dark skin and was a little thin. The woman was weak and sickly, as if she could be blown away by a gust of wind. This couple was very simple and honest. The villagers of Apricot Blossom Village quickly accepted them, especially the man. He was very kind. When he went deep into the mountains to chop firewood, he would often bring back some game and share it with the neighbors. Very quickly, this couple had a good reputation among the neighbors. The neighbors all praised this couple for being kind and hardworking. Moreover, this couple was well known for their love in Apricot Blossom Village. Every morning, the man would carry a hatchet and leave the house. The wife would stand at the door and watch the man leave. Only when the man's back disappeared into the sunset would she look away. In the evening, the man would carry a pile of firewood and lead some game back under the sunset. Every time the wife would wait at the door for the man to come back. Every time she saw the man coming back under the sunset, the wife would reveal a happy smile. Time passed year after year. This couple had reached middle age. The man's hair had turned white and the wife's hair had turned white. Perhaps it was because they were middle-aged, but the man no longer had the strength to go deep into the mountains to chop firewood. In order to make a living, the man began to learn carving. Every day, he would sit in front of the door and focus on carving different wood carvings with a carving knife. His wife would squat at the side and watch the man carve. On this day, a group of children happily passed by the couple's door. They happened to see the middle-aged man sitting at the door, focused on carving a palm-sized python. Looking carefully, this python was lifelike. The scales on its surface did not look like snake scales, but more like dragon scales. "Uncle Joie, is this a snake you're carving? Why is this snake so much more powerful than ordinary snakes? It's like a dragon. Is this really a snake?" A bold and oldest boy came to the door of the middle-aged man's house and looked at the strange creature that was neither a snake nor a dragon in the middle-aged man's hand and asked curiously. The middle-aged man stopped carving and looked up at the boy with a smile. "It's a dragon. This is not a snake. This is a flood dragon that is about to turn into a dragon. So the scales on this flood dragon are beginning to transform into dragon scales." "It's a flood dragon?" I've heard the storytellers in the village say that the flood dragon is a legendary divine beast. It's very terrifying and is even more powerful than immortals that fly into the sky. I've heard that the flood dragon even eats people, so it's very terrifying. The boy named DeLong said as his eyes lit up. DeLong is smart. This is a flood dragon." The middle-aged man laughed. Then he patted his head and said, "I almost forgot. I've already finished the wooden bowls your father told me to make yesterday. I'll have my wife bring them to you now." After saying this, the middle-aged man shouted into the house, "Chin Shui, bring out the 12 wooden bowls I made yesterday. DeLong is here to get them today." A clear and melodious voice replied from within the house. Soon after, a middle-aged woman who still retained her charm slowly walked out. She held a wooden tray in her hand, and on the tray were 12 exquisite wooden bowls. If one did not look carefully at these wooden bowls, they would think that they were made of jade. It was enough to pass off as real. DeLong looked at the middle-aged woman in the house, and his eyes revealed a look of shock. Uncle Zhu's wife was famous. DeLong had heard his father mention her since he was young. He said that Uncle Zhu's wife, Aunt Shui, was one of the top beauties in the city. "DeLong, what are you looking at? Quickly take this wooden bowl," the middle-aged woman said with a gentle smile. DeLong came back to his senses and his face flushed red. He hurriedly took the wooden bowl and expressed his gratitude. Then he took out 12 copper coins from his bosom and said, "Uncle Joie, your craftsmanship is so good. My father often praises you. This is 12 copper coins. Take it." The middle-aged man laughed as he took the copper coins and said, "Ha, ha, you're too kind. If your family needs anything in the future, just come find me. That's for sure." Chapter 25:03. Wood carving spring passed, and autumn came. Time flew by. Juon sat in front of his house and carved wood every day. After that, he would accompany his wife, Mu Chin-shue, to eat and chat about daily life. Occasionally, he would even visit the neighbors nearby. Every time he carved, Mu Chin-shue would silently watch. Moreover, she also knew that regardless of whether Juon was carving a human or a beast, there were all the enemies and beasts that Juon had killed over the years. Every time he finished carving, Juon would sink into his memories and recall the various details of the battle. It could be said that as he carved deeper, Zhuo Wen's understanding of his own body became deeper. "Uncle Zhuo, you're carving again? You're really persistent. You've been carving for more than 20 years, haven't you?" When a young man passed by Zhuo's house, he subconsciously stopped and immediately looked at the door. When he saw that Zhuo was still carving wood, he could not help but laugh. The young man was in his early 20s. His wheat-colored skin showed the beauty of health. His well-proportioned body and firm muscles made him look quite strong. "Dalong, in the blink of an eye, you've already grown so big." Zhuon put down his carving knife and looked at the young man at the door with a smile. This young man was Dalong, who came to Zhuon's house more than 10 years ago to get the wooden bowl. 10 years ago, Dalong's family left Apricot Blossom Village and went to a nearby town to do business. At that time, the villagers did not send Dalong's family off. Everyone praised Dalong's father for his ability to buy a house in the town. The young man chuckled, but his gaze fell on the wood carving in Zhuon's hands. The wood carving in Zhuon's hands was only half completed. The upper half of the wood carving was clear, but the lower half had not been carved yet. What surprised the young man was that Zhuon was carving a figure at this time. Moreover, this figure actually had 3 heads and 6 arms. The 3 heads and 6 arms of this strange figure had different expressions. The 6 arms were also forming 6 different hand seals. It looked quite strange. "Uncle Zhuo, what kind of strange figure are you carving? It even has 3 heads and 6 arms," DeLong said curiously. Zhuon smiled and said, "This is just something I made out of boredom. I don't know what it is either." Dalong's interest was piqued. The 3-headed, 6-armed monster in front of him looked very lifelike. He could clearly see the texture of its skin. This made Dalong marvel at Zhuon's craftsmanship. "Uncle Zhuo, I really like this carving of yours. How about this? Why don't you sell it to me?" Dalong smiled. Zhuon's face was solemn. He stroked his white beard and said, "Dalong, you know my rules. This wood carving is my hobby. I usually don't sell it," so Dalong looked disappointed, but he really liked the wood carving. However, seeing Uncle Zhuo's insistence, Dalong had to give up. "Uncle Zhuo, I came back to the village this time because my father is old and wants to go back to his hometown to enjoy his old age. Moreover, my father is weak and sickly now. It's a little inconvenient for him to walk. So, Uncle Zhuo, can you help me make a crutch for my father?" Dalong asked earnestly. Zhuon smiled and said, "No problem." As he spoke, he randomly chose a slender piece of wood in the courtyard. Immediately, the carving knife in his hand began to carve on the wood. Dalong looked enviously at Zhuon's smooth movements. Speaking of which, Uncle Zhuo was about the same age as his father. He was already in his 50s. However, Uncle Zhuo in front of him did not look old at all. His movements were as smooth as a young man in his early 20s. If it wasn't for the numerous wrinkles on Zhuo Wen's face, Dalong wouldn't have believed that Zhuo Wen was an old man who was about to enter his 70s with just this move alone. Done. After half an hour, Zhuo Wen put down the carving knife with satisfaction and handed the finished crutch to Dalong's eyes lit up. The crutch in front of him was definitely the most comfortable crutch he had ever seen in his life. Moreover, when he held the crutch in his hand, he felt his whole body tremble. It was as if a warm current was spreading from his palm to his entire body. "Thank you, Uncle Joie. Here are 10 taels of silver. Take it." DeLong looked at the crutch with great satisfaction, then took out 10 taels of silver and handed it to Juan. Unfortunately, Juan did not take it. Instead, he looked at DeLong seriously and said, "DeLong, didn't I say that I have my own rules? The price of the crutch is 10 copper coins. I can't accept these 10 taels of silver." DeLong looked embarrassed and said embarrassedly, "Uncle Joie, I was too impulsive. I haven't been here for too long, so I forgot about your rules. Here are 10 copper coins. Please take it." Juan took the 10 copper coins and nodded with satisfaction. He picked up the unfinished wooden carving and began to carve again. "Uncle Joie, are you sure you don't want to sell this wooden carving?" DeLong looked at the wooden carving in Juan's hands and asked. Juan shook his head and answered DeLong's question. "Uncle Joie, I'll take my leave first." DeLong sighed softly and took his leave. "Husband, I heard from neighbors that DeLong was the top scorer in Heavy Rain Country. It's said that the king admires DeLong and specially betrothed the princess to DeLong." A woman with wrinkles on her face walked out of the house. From the woman's facial features, it could be seen that when she was young, she was definitely a beauty. Juan put down the carving knife and looked at the woman with a smile. "It's good that DeLong is promising. It will be good for the village." The woman nodded and said with a smile, "I also heard that DeLong planned to renovate the houses in the village and the dilapidated temple in the suburbs in addition to sending his father back to his hometown. It's good that he has such intentions." Juan paused for a moment, and his eyes showed a hint of contemplation. "Husband, DeLong has been a strong child since he was young. I don't think he has ever asked you for anything. On the contrary, he often helps you." Muchinshua suddenly said. Juan smiled and said, "I know. After I finish this wood carving, I'll give it to DeLong as a memento." Muchinshua smiled and said, "When the time comes, the child will be overjoyed." As night fell, a sneaky figure entered the low house. The figure quickly entered the living room of the stone house. There were rows of shelves in the living room, and on the shelves were various kinds of wood carvings. The figure quickly noticed that under a shelf in the corner, there was an unfinished wood carving. The wood carving had 3 heads and 6 arms, and it was very lifelike. The moment he saw the wood carving, the figure was full of energy. He picked up the half-finished wood carving and looked at it carefully. His eyes showed satisfaction. Soon, the figure became hesitant. He took out a palm-sized brocade bag and placed it in the original position of the wood carving. "Uncle Joie, I'm sorry. I really like this wood carving. I'll be leaving tomorrow. I'm afraid I won't have the chance to return to Apricot Flower Village. I don't want to miss this wood carving." Chapter 2504. Immortal. After the figure left the house, the door to the living room opened and an old couple slowly walked out. Juan, with a head full of gray hair, walked to the shelf in the corner, squatted down, and picked up the brocade bag. He shook his head and said, "This child really likes that wooden carving. Perhaps he feels guilty, but he actually gave so much money. Are you going to return it to him?" Muchinshua asked. Juan shook his head and said, "There's no need for that. That wooden sculpture contains a trace of my aura, and it can protect him from calamity. If I have the chance, I'll complete the incomplete product before I leave." The next day, DeLong left Apricot Blossom Village under the warm farewell of the neighbors. But what made DeLong ashamed was that he did not see Uncle Joie and his wife in the crowd. Another 10 years passed in a flash. This year, heavy snow fell in Heavy Rain Country, and snowflakes covered the entire capital. This heavy snow was rare in 100 years and caused endless snow disasters. The capital of Heavy Rain Country frequently received emergency documents from all over the country. The contents of these documents were nothing more than a certain place being affected by the snow disaster. The victims were suffering from hunger and cold, countless deaths and injuries, and wails were everywhere. At this moment, DeLong was already more than 30 years old. After 10 years of mingling in the officialdom, DeLong finally became the prime minister. His position was high, and he was respected by all the civil and military officials. DeLong opened the window and looked at the heavy snow outside. He frowned and showed a trace of worry. "Brother Long, what are you thinking about?" A beautiful woman took out a mink coat and gently put it onto Long's back and asked in surprise. DeLong sighed and said, "I am thinking about whether Apricot Blossom Village is safe. Although my father passed away 3 years ago, there are still many people and things in the village from my childhood memories. Are they safe?" Speaking of this, DeLong turned his head and looked at the half-finished wooden carving on the bookshelf behind the study. This wooden carving had accompanied him for 10 years. In these 10 years, it wasn't that he hadn't thought of looking for other carpenters to carve this half-finished wooden carving, but when those carpenters received this half-finished wooden carving, they strangely couldn't do it. Even the most skillful carpenter in the capital would not be able to do it, or rather, he would not even know where to start. That was because the wood carving was too exquisite. Such craftsmanship far surpassed that of all the carpenters in Heavy Rain Country. DeLong thought of Uncle Joie, who often sat outside his house and focused on carving. 10 years ago, after stealing this half-finished product, he had always felt guilty and was too ashamed to go back to see Uncle Joie. I wonder how Uncle Joie and his wife are doing. Boom, boom. All of a sudden, a terrifying multicolored energy descended from the heavy snow outside. These energies were so dazzling and glaring in the snow-white world. In just an instant, many buildings in the capital of Heavy Rain Country were turned into ruins the moment they came into contact with the energy. The streets of the capital were instantly thrown into chaos. Many people fled in panic in the universities, aimlessly. Cries, screams, and prayers rang out incessantly in the capital. It was chaos. "What's going on?" DeLong's expression changed drastically. His wife, who was beside him, was trembling. Her eyes were filled with confusion, not knowing what to do. "My lord, something bad has happened. There are 2 immortals fighting in the sky above the capital. Our capital has been affected, and the king is in imminent danger." A servant barged into the study and said in fear. DeLong's pupil shrank. He did not expect that the legendary immortals would fight in the Heavy Rain Country of the mortal world. How many lives would this cause? It should be known that the immortals only needed to wave their hands to easily kill mortals. In the 10 years that DeLong had been an official, he had come into contact with many secrets. He knew that there were many immortals in this world with great magical powers. However, these immortals all had their own rules. They could not easily set foot in the mortal world. Otherwise, with the magical powers of the immortals, it was enough to cause endless disasters to the mortal world. "My lord, you should flee quickly. Your subordinate has already prepared carriage. We can leave the capital immediately. Those 2 immortals are too terrifying. If we stay in the capital, we'll only be waiting for death." The servant was still kneeling on the ground as he earnestly advised. DeLong coldly snorted and said, "Do you want me to abandon the king? As an official, I should do my best for the king until I die. You take the madam and leave the capital first. I need to go to the imperial palace." "Brother Long, Fu is right. You can't go. Immortals are not something that we mortals can fight against. It's useless even if you go. Moreover, the king has an immortal master by his side. The king will be fine, but you won't be." The beautiful woman tugged at DeLong's sleeve and said reluctantly. DeLong pushed away the beautiful woman's hand and said seriously, "I said it before. Since I am an official, I must fulfill my responsibilities as an official. You don't need to persuade me. Fu, take the madam and leave. This is an order." The servant hesitated for a moment, then got up and forcibly took the beautiful woman away. Boom, boom, boom. The rumbling sounds in the capital became more and more terrifying. More than half of the once magnificent city was now in ruins. DeLong straightened his clothes and looked at the increasingly terrifying aftermath of the battle outside. His eyes were as calm as an ancient well. Before leaving the study, his gaze once again fell on the half-finished wooden sculpture on the bookshelf. After a moment of hesitation, he took the half-finished wooden sculpture with him. "This time I am doomed. I'll take you with me. If I die this time, then that is my fate." Muttering to himself, Dalong left the mansion and walked directly to the imperial palace. As soon as he walked out of the mansion and onto the streets, Dalong saw countless people running around in disorder and the surrounding ruins. Dalong raised his head. In the hazy city, he could vaguely see two shadows that were constantly exchanging blows. These two shadows were thousands of miles high in the sky. Dalong could only see a trace of their silhouettes. Every time these two shadows clashed, sparks would fly from the collision. For the people in the capital, it was a disaster. Amidst the boundless snow, the flames in the capital soared into the sky, as if mocking the terrifying snow disaster. Dalong's gaze fell on the imperial palace again. He found that the imperial palace was also on fire. At least 30% of the buildings inside were destroyed or submerged in the fire. Dalong walked through the streets and entered the imperial palace until he reached the door of the king's hall. Along the way, Dalong was like an outsider. Wherever he passed by, the aftermath of the battle between the two immortals was not affected by it. Outside the king's hall, there was a layer of invisible ripples. Dalong could not see the rippling energy at all. This was a protective restriction. It was set up by the only immortal master of Rain Country in the king's hall to protect the king. Creak! Dalong opened the door and stepped directly into the king's hall, ignoring the restriction. At this moment, the king's hall was filled with civil and military officials. However, these civil and military officials had fear in their eyes, and their words were full of fear. At the head of the king's hall sat a majestic middle-aged man. The middle-aged man was the current king of Rain Country. Next to the middle-aged man stood a young man with an arrogant face. This young man was the only immortal master of Rain Country. The king usually called him Immortal Master Su. When Dalong ignored the restriction and entered the king's hall, all the civil and military officials, including the king and Immortal Master Su, looked at Dalong in unison. Chapter 2505. Immortal Master Su-1 had to know that Immortal Master Su had just solemnly stated how powerful the restriction he had set up was. No matter how powerful the two immortals were, they wouldn't be able to break the restriction. Naturally, mortals wouldn't be able to enter the King Palace. However, in the next moment, Prime Minister Dalong had easily opened the door and entered the main hall. This was a slap to Immortal Master Su's face. "Wang Long greets your highness." Dalong knelt on the ground and cupped his hands, respectfully bowing to the king. When he entered, Dalong also noticed the unusual atmosphere in the main hall. However, he did not pay much attention to it, thinking that it was because of the battle between the two immortals. "Immortal Master Su, what's going on?" The king sat in his seat with an ugly expression. He did not allow Dalong to rise. Immortal Master Su was also a little embarrassed. He said in a low voice, "Rest assured, your highness. I'll go take a look." As he spoke, Immortal Master Su came to the door and carefully inspected it. He was surprised to find that his restriction was still there. However, how did the Prime Minister of Heavy Rain Country ignore his restriction and enter the main hall? "Your highness, there's no problem with the restriction. It's still there." However, Immortal Master Su said with a frown. The monarch's eyes were gloomy. Just as he was about to speak, a general volunteered, "Monarch, let me try this restriction. If this restriction really exists, I will definitely not be able to pass through it. If I can pass through it, it means that the Immortal Master is deliberately mystifying things." Immortal Master Su looked at the general coldly. However, the latter did not pay any attention to him. Instead, he took a step forward and was about to leave the King Palace. "Ah!" The general screamed as he was hit in the chest by a blast of energy. His entire body flew backward and landed heavily on the floor of the main hall. "There's no problem with the restriction." The king's eyes lit up. He immediately looked at Dalong, who was still kneeling on the ground in confusion. Dalong was also puzzled. He had seen the miserable state of the general just now and knew that the Immortal Master had set up a powerful restriction outside the King Palace. However, he was puzzled as to why the Prime Minister could enter the main hall without any hindrance. Immortal Master Su narrowed his eyes and looked coldly at DeLong. He concluded that this mortal Master Prime Minister must have some kind of treasure. Otherwise, it was impossible for him to ignore the restriction. Rumble. Just as Master Immortal Su was about to speak, the King Palace suddenly shook violently. Then, a huge hole was blasted in the top of the King Palace. A fireball landed in the middle of the King Palace, immediately igniting a raging fire. All the civil and military officials in the hall were burned to ashes by the fire. The monarch was so scared that he quickly retreated. Unfortunately, the fire had sealed off all his escape routes. He hurriedly asked Immortal Master Su for help. Immortal Master Su, quickly save me. However, Master Immortal Su took a few steps back and stared at the fire in the hall in horror. He found that he had underestimated the two cultivators in the battle. The flames from the aftermath of the battle actually gave him a sense of danger. He was sure that if he dared to jump into the fire, he would be doomed. Immortal Master Su coldly snorted and retreated to the corner of the hall. He coldly looked at the king, who had already revealed a look of despair. DeLong looked at the retreating Immortal Master Su and knew that it was impossible for the latter to help. Thus, he took a deep breath and jumped into the fire, rushing toward the monarch. The terrifying heat caused DeLong to involuntarily cry out. However, the pain gradually faded away. He found that a purple barrier had appeared on his body at some point, blocking the surrounding fire. DeLong quickly discovered that the energy source of the purple barrier was actually the half-finished wooden carving in his arms. DeLong thought of Uncle Joie. He didn't expect that the wooden carving Uncle Joie gave him would have such a miraculous ability. At the same time, DeLong thought of the countless strange beasts that Uncle Joie had carved when he was a child. Those strange beasts were all famous and powerful divine beasts in myths and legends. He had even never seen most of them before. Moreover, each of the wooden carvings was lifelike. If DeLong hadn't seen the real thing, he didn't think that anyone could carve so lifelike. DeLong now understood why Uncle Joie was able to carve so many lifelike wooden carvings. It was very likely that Uncle Joie had seen them before. However, Uncle Joie came to Apricot Blossom Village in his 20s. His experience might not even be as rich as DeLong's. Thus, there was only one possibility. Uncle Joie was definitely an immortal who lived in seclusion in Apricot Blossom Village. DeLong's eyes lit up with excitement when he thought of this possibility. Fortunately, he didn't forget his purpose in entering the fire. He quickly walked to the monarch's side, supported him, and quickly rushed out of the sea of fire. Immortal Master Su watched this scene with his mouth agape. Even he was afraid of the fire, but a mere mortal could come and go as he pleased. Was this a joke? However, Immortal Master Su soon saw DeLong take out a half-finished wooden carving. His eyes lit up with excitement. Minister Long, I really have to thank you this time. If it weren't for you, I would have fallen in the monarch's palace. The monarch said gratefully. DeLong shook his head. Just as he was about to speak, the sound of wind breaking came. DeLong spat out a mouthful of blood and was sent flying. Immortal Master Su, what is the meaning of this? The monarch looked at Immortal Master Su, who suddenly attacked, and asked in shock and anger. Immortal Master Su sneered at the monarch and ignored him. Instead, he stared at DeLong and said, "Hand over the wooden carving in your hand, and I'll spare your life." DeLong covered his chest and looked at Immortal Master Su in shock and anger. He said, "As an immortal master, you actually want to rob me, a mere mortal?" Immortal Master Su's face was gloomy. He said coldly, "Since you want to die, I'll fulfill your wish." After saying that, Immortal Master Su didn't wait for DeLong to speak. He suddenly pulled out a long sword and stabbed it at DeLong's vital point. However, the moment DeLong's sword swept over, the wooden carving in DeLong's hand floated in midair. A terrifying wave of energy bounced back and turned DeLong's sword into dust. At the same time, an even more vast wave of energy turned into a spiral and shot toward Immortal Master Su. Immortal Master Su didn't even have time to grunt before he was blasted into nothingness by this wave of energy. Plop! The monarch sat on the ground and looked at DeLong in awe. He hurriedly said, "Minister Long, no, Immortal Master Long, you're also an immortal. Why didn't you say so earlier?" Chapter 2506. Revisiting an old place. Your Majesty, I'll take you out of the capital first. It's too dangerous now, DeLong said to the monarch as he cleared his mind of distracting thoughts. The monarch nodded, but his attitude towards DeLong was much more respectful. DeLong was able to kill Immortal Master Su in one move. It was obvious that DeLong was an even more powerful Immortal Master. DeLong did not care about the monarch's thoughts. He wanted to return to Apricot Blossom Village even more. He wanted to ask Uncle Zhuo what was going on. After DeLong he left the king's palace, he immediately found two fierce horses. Taking advantage of the heavy snow, he immediately fled toward the road outside the capital. The moment the two of them stepped out of the capital on their horses, a dazzling shockwave fell right above their heads. Boom! In an instant, a huge hole appeared where the two of them were standing, and the two fierce horses were completely turned into nothingness. Under the aftermath of the explosion, the monarch disappeared without a trace. In this hole, only DeLong was left kneeling on the ground in fear. You're just a mortal. You didn't die from the aftershock just now? Above the snowy sky, a surprised voice sounded. Then, a young man in blue descended from the snowy sky. The young man in blue was extremely handsome. He had red lips and white teeth. If he was in the mortal world, he would definitely attract a lot of girls. The young man in blue swung the divine sword in his right hand and destroyed the attack from the snowy sky. Then, he grabbed at DeLong, who was in the pit. DeLong looked at the young man in blue's hand in fear. Although he was only immortal, he could see that the young man in blue was much more powerful than Immortal Master Su. They were not on the same level at all. However, the moment the young man in blue's hand landed on DeLong, he suddenly felt a sense of danger. Then, a boundless purple aura gushed out of DeLong's body. This purple aura turned into a whirlpool and blasted towards the young man in blue's hand. Suddenly, the hand formed by the young man's divine power collapsed inch by inch. Moreover, at the moment when Z destroyed the blue-clothed young man's divine power giant hand, it did not show any mercy. It actually blasted towards the blue-clothed young man's body. It was intending to destroy the blue-clothed young man's body and soul. The blue-robed young man was so scared that he broke out in a cold sweat. He didn't expect that this mortal would have such power. He quickly took out a light blue magic charm from his spirit ring. The blue-clothed youth looked at the blue talisman in his hand with a pained expression. Then, he clenched his teeth and crushed the talisman. Suddenly, an extremely terrifying icy energy condensed around him, forming a solid castle wall around him. The ice and snow barrier shattered, and the blue-clothed youth appeared in a sorry state. Only then did he manage to block the terrifying power of the purple intent. This mortal must have a great treasure on him. The blue-clothed youth's face was a little pale, but his eyes were blazing as he stared at DeLong. Just now, he hadn't used his full strength. Now that he was going all out, he didn't believe that he couldn't take down a mere mortal. Whoosh! Just as the young man in blue was about to attack again, the wooden sculpture in DeLong's arms flew out and floated above DeLong's head. Then, a purple energy wrapped around DeLong and broke through the sky. Damn it! The blue-clothed youth cursed and followed closely behind. Originally, the blue-clothed youth was fighting a burly man. After the blue-clothed youth was blasted away by the purple energy on DeLong's body, he stopped attacking. Instead, he looked at DeLong with a strange gaze. After DeLong broke through the sky and left, the burly man immediately followed him. He had the same thought as the blue-clothed youth. A mortal without any cultivation was actually able to block the blue-clothed youth's attack. From this, it could be seen that this mortal must have an extraordinary treasure on him. The two of them tacitly followed behind and didn't fight again. Obviously, They had a temporary truce and wanted to figure out the treasure on this mortal's body first. This is the direction of Apricot Blossom Village. DeLong was passively led by the purple energy. Soon, he realized that the purple energy was heading in the direction of Apricot Blossom Village, which he was familiar with. After a while, DeLong saw the small village in the mountains ahead. Along the way, DeLong saw too many towns covered in snow and disaster victims everywhere. This made DeLong very worried about the situation in Apricot Blossom Village. However, the moment he saw Apricot Blossom Village in front of him, he was stunned. Within 100 miles of Apricot Blossom Village, it was like spring all year round. It was overflowing with greenery, and smoke rose from every house. It was as if the village was completely isolated from the snow disaster outside. Moreover, DeLong also realized that 100 miles away from Apricot Blossom Village, it was still snowing heavily. The snow piled up to a depth of several feet. When DeLong entered Apricot Blossom Village, the blue-clothed youth and the burly man behind him stopped. This small village actually has a restriction formation set up by someone. Could it be that a cultivator is living in seclusion here? The blue-clothed youth frowned and said. The big man sneered and said, "The level of this formation is too low. In the eyes of the two of us, there is nothing strange about it. You are a true god disciple of the Chi cultivation sword sect, and you are actually afraid of a mere formation." The blue-clothed youth snorted and said, "I just feel that it's strange that such a restriction formation would appear in such a small village in the mortal world. I didn't say that I would be afraid of this restriction formation. Speaking of which, this cultivator who lives in seclusion has no ambition. He is even worse compared to those loose cultivators who proclaim themselves as kings in the mundane world. To think that he would live in seclusion in a small village. What a joke." The burly man nodded and said, "Watch me break this restriction formation." As he spoke, the burly man took out a huge double-edged axe and charged into the restriction formation. "Isn't this DeLong? When did you return to Apricot Blossom Village? You didn't even inform me that you were coming back." When DeLong landed at the entrance of the village, an old woman with white hair was sweeping the ground. When she saw DeLong, she was pleasantly surprised. "Aunt Wong." DeLong forced a smile and said, "By the way, Aunt Wong, why isn't the village affected by the snow disaster at all?" The old woman put away her broom and looked at the heavy snow 100 miles away. She smiled and said, "We villagers are also baffled. When the snow is falling like goose feathers within 100 miles of our Apricot Blossom Village, it's like spring all year round. The weather is very comfortable. Maybe the heavens are blessing our Apricot Blossom Village." DeLong smiled bitterly. He knew that the reason why Apricot Blossom Village was able to avoid the snow disaster was most likely related to that mysterious Uncle Joie. Taking out the half-finished wood carving from his chest, DeLong said, "Aunt Wong, is Uncle Joie still in the village?" "Yes. Master Joie has been carving all kinds of wood products for the village all these years. I have to say that Master Joie's skills are really good. Now that he's over 70 years old, he's still very energetic and insists on carving wood every day. I have to admire his serious spirit," Aunt Wong said with a smile. "That's good." Chapter 25:07. The last wood carving, however, the closer they got to Uncle Joie's house, the more nervous DeLong became. He could not help but tighten his grip on the wooden carving. When he came to the familiar door, he saw a white-haired, slightly stooped old man. He was holding a carving knife with a focused expression, staring at the dragon at the door. Uncle Joie," DeLong stuttered. Juan looked at DeLong with a smile and said, "DeLong, the wood carving in your hand is only half finished. Bring it over and let Uncle finish it for you." After a moment of silence, DeLong walked over and handed the wooden carving to Juan. Juan smiled and took the wooden carving. Then he concentrated on carving. DeLong, on the other hand, stared at Juan, who looked to be in his 70s, with a complicated expression. The old man in front of him was indeed related to the immortal with boundless magic power. "Ah, How dare you show off such a trashy restriction in front of me? An insolent voice resounded like thunder in Apricot Blossom Village, causing all the villagers to come out. Dalong's expression changed drastically. He was extremely anxious. Looking at Zhuan, who was still carving, he hurriedly said, "Uncle Zhua, there are two immortals outside the village. It's because of me." So, before Dalong could finish his words, the arrogant voice had already appeared behind him. The blue-clothed youth and the burly man had unknowingly appeared at the door of Zhuan's hut. "You're just a mere mortal. Don't you know that treasuring a jade ring is a crime? If you don't want to die, you'd better hand over your treasures." The blue-clothed youth ignored the white-haired old man who was still focused on carving. Instead, he stared coldly at Dalong. Although he knew that the dragon had a rare treasure, he had not seen the true face of the rare treasure before, so he did not know that the purple power actually came from the incomplete wood carving. Dalong's heart tightened. He could not help but retreat to the side of Zhuan, who was still carving. However, he soon realized that this would bring disaster to Uncle Zhua, so he immediately calmed down. He looked directly at the blue-clothed youth and said, "You can have my treasures, but you have to promise me that you will never hurt anyone in Apricot Blossom Village." The burly man grinned and said cruelly, "A mere mortal dares to raise conditions in front of me? Die." The big man reached out with his right hand, intending to grab Dalong in front of him. However, the moment it arrived in front of Dalong, the giant hand made of divine power collapsed with a loud bang, and the burly man let out a muffled groan and crashed to the ground behind him in an extremely sorry state. What happened? The young man in blue looked at the big man who was sent flying, and his expression turned serious. He couldn't help but observe the surroundings with his divine sense. He found that there was no third person here other than the old man in the sculpture and this ordinary mortal. Then who sent the big man flying? The blue-clothed young man's gaze landed on the old man's body. The old man's aura was ordinary, but the blue-clothed young man felt that this old man was not ordinary. This was because the old man didn't show the slightest change in expression when he saw the two of them. Instead, he was still concentrating on the wooden sculpture in his hand. In order to verify his guess, the blue-clothed young man's eyes shone with an ominous glint. He took out the divine sword in his hand and shot it toward the old man at the door. "Be careful," Dalong shouted. Crack! The divine sword fell a few inches away from the old man's head and suddenly stopped. Then it shattered with a loud bang. The blue-clothed young man was greatly shocked. This was his natal artifact, and it shattered for no reason. He knew that this must be the old man's doing. The old man in front of him was at least a void sky expert to be able to easily send the big man flying and shatter his natal artifact. "Senior, I am Chun Xian, a true god disciple of the Qi cultivation sword sect. I have offended you just now. Please forgive me. Chun Xian will leave now." Chun Xian cupped his hands and was about to leave immediately. However, he soon discovered that a powerful confinement force had appeared around him. A formless and terrifying killing intent had completely enveloped him. Chun Xian knew very well that if he dared to take a step back, this terrifying killing intent would immediately materialize. The owner of this killing intent would attack him mercilessly. "Let this old man finish this wooden sculpture first," Zhuan said indifferently and continued to focus on carving the wooden sculpture. Chun Xian's heart was filled with bitterness. His attention also fell on the wooden sculpture in Zhuan's hand. His pupils shrank, and he couldn't help but blurt out, "Great Brahma." Dalong silently watched all of this, but his heart was in turmoil. He vaguely guessed that the Uncle Zhua he knew since he was young was really a mysterious immortal. Moreover, he was much more powerful than the two immortals in front of him. When Zhuan finished carving the last stroke, he put down the carving knife. A trace of a smile appeared in his eyes. He handed the wooden sculpture to Dalong and said, "Dalong, this is the complete wooden sculpture. Keep it by your side in the future. For so many years, your family has taken good care of us. Consider it as repayment." Dalong hurriedly took the wooden sculpture and looked at the old man in front of him with a complicated gaze. He said with some uncertainty, "Uncle Zhu, whether it is or not isn't that important. I've already completed the last piece of work. Do you know why I've been working tirelessly on wood carvings all these years? Moreover, every single wood carving is either a strange figure or a beast, right? Zhuowen asked with a smile. DeLong shook his head blankly. Because those are all the opponents I have encountered in my cultivation. The wooden sculpture in your hand is called Great Brahma. It is the last opponent I have faced in my cultivation. Now, I'm giving it to you. Zhuowen said with a smile. The blue-clothed youth at the door narrowed his eyes. He stared at the old man in front of him and thought of a legendary figure. A figure who killed Great Brahma and became the new ruler of the Sky region. His name was Zhuowen. You are the master of the Sky region? Master of the Sky region. I have eyes but failed to recognize Mount Tai. I hope that master of the Sky region will not take it to heart. The blue-clothed youth quickly begged for mercy. DeLong, Chun Shui, and I will be leaving this place. After Zhuowen finished speaking, he disappeared in front of DeLong's eyes. The blue-clothed youth and the struggling man on the ground disappeared with him. DeLong looked at all of this in a daze. It was like a dream. High up in the sky, Zhuowen and Mu Qinshui had already returned to their original appearances. The two of them looked down at the heavy rain country and the other countries under the heavy snow. Husband, what do you plan to do with those two? Mu Qinshui looked at the people under the heavy snow and sighed. Kill. Zhuowen's gaze turned cold. He looked at the countless refugees below who were caught in the disaster and said, if it weren't for the two of them wantonly fighting and even fighting in the mortal world, such a terrifying natural disaster wouldn't have happened around the heavy rain country. The innocent people wouldn't have become refugees who couldn't even live or die. Mu Qinshui nodded. She also agreed with Zhuowen's approach. Cultivators shouldn't have any connection with a mortal world. This was the rule of the cultivation world. Not to mention, powerful cultivators were actually fighting in the mortal world. It was a complete mess. Then, husband, what do you plan to do with them? Mu Qinshui looked at Zhuowen and asked. Let time and space return to its original point. You and I shouldn't have appeared here, so, as Zhuowen spoke, he pointed out with his right hand. Instantly, the power of time and space spread throughout the entire mortal world. Then, time and space gradually flowed backward at this moment, like an inverted hourglass. Chapter 25:08 Life Comprehending Realm, Reversing Time and Space. Husband, your space-time laws have already reached perfection? Mu Qinshui asked in a pleasantly surprised voice. Zhuowen revealed a faint smile and said, That's right. In these 50 years, which is half a mortal's life, I have recorded all the big and small battles and matters of my life in the form of memories. It's like I'm walking in the flow of time and space, looking at my past bit by bit, allowing my understanding of the space-time laws to reach perfection. Then you're about to break through? Mu Qinshui asked in a pleasantly surprised voice. Zhuowen said with a smile, That's right, my comprehension has already reached the life-comprehending realm. I originally chose to use the space-time laws to break through to the 9 steps void sky, which is different from other cultivators. Now that my space-time laws have reached perfection, it's time for me to break through to the life-comprehending realm. Let's go. This place is not suitable for breaking through. I need to go to a quiet place. That's right. Chun Shui, this is for you. After saying this, Zhuowen took out a black and white divine pill and handed it to Mu Qinshui. This is the life or death pill. Mu Qinshui asked in a surprised voice. That's right. The life or death pill has a large effect on cultivators who have reached the 9 steps void sky. You're already very close to the life or death realm. So if you swallow this life or death pill, you should be able to directly break through to the life or death realm. You might even be able to comprehend the power of life and death, breaking through to the life and death realm. Zhuowen said. Mu Qinshui said in a serious voice, Husband, you're about to break through to the life-comprehending realm. This life or death pill is more useful for you than me. Zhuowen shook his head and said, I'm still too far away from the life or death realm. If I swallow this life or death pill right after breaking through to the life comprehending realm, my future foundation will be unstable. You're more suitable than me. Mu Chinxue saw that Zhuowen was determined, so she could only nod in agreement. After leaving the mortal world, Zhuowen and Mu Chinxue found an uninhabited meteorite belt. Zhuowen spent a few days opening up a cave in the center of the meteorite belt. He set up many powerful formations around the perimeter and asked Xiaohe, the blood immortal sword, and the king spirit of the Canglan secret territory to protect them. Then, he and Mu Chinxue entered the cave and began to cultivate. King Spirit, Zhang Jiqing, and Chun Changsheng all looked at the cave where Zhuowen was cultivating. Over the years, after the three of them became Zhuowen slaves, they basically stayed in the Canglan secret realm to cultivate. Their cultivation speed was pretty good, and they all broke through the half-step void sky ninth step. But what shocked them the most was Zhuowen's cultivation speed. He had reached the half-step void sky ninth step, and it looked like he was going to break through again. When Zhuowen was only at the void sky seventh step, he was already able to defeat them. Now that Zhuowen was going to break through to the life enlightening realm, they couldn't help but wonder how strong he would be. Master is really talented, King Spirit said with a sigh. I heard that the ruler of the Great Brahma region, Great Brahma, was destroyed by him. Zhang Jiqing and Chun Changsheng fell silent. They had watched Zhuowen rise, step by step. Now, Zhuowen was someone they could only look up to. Half a year later, the three of them stood up and looked at the cave in the middle of the meteorite belt. Inside the cave, an extremely terrifying energy surged out. This energy contained boundless vitality. The three of them were not ignorant, and when they felt the energy, they knew that Zhuowen had broken through. This energy was the mysterious life God power, and it had the characteristics of an endless cycle. Boom! The door of the cave in the middle of the meteorite belt opened, and a young man in white clothes walked out. At that moment, the white-clothed young man's presence was completely absent. He seemed like an ordinary person. However, if one looked closely, they would be able to tell that the young man's starry eyes were filled with a blazing light. Master! The three of them quickly bowed. Thunder Fire Sword and Blood Fairy Sword landed next to Zhuowen. They looked at Zhuowen and said, "It looks like you broke through successfully." Zhuowen nodded, and there was a trace of excitement in his eyes. According to the original plan, it would take him at least 1,000 years to break through to the life enlightening realm. But Zhuowen and Mu Chinxue had been living in seclusion for 50 years, and during that time, they had gained an unexpected insight. They had used a carving knife to record the memories of their battles. Through the form of memories, he went against the flow of time and space, and his understanding of time and space was complete. Now that his understanding of time and space was complete, as long as he had enough energy, breaking through would not be a problem. Zhuowen nodded to the three of them and said, "You three have been with me for a long time. I promised you that when I finish my cultivation, I would set you free. Now, I will fulfill my promise." After that, Zhuowen waved his right hand, and 3 red lights shot out from the three of them. The three of them felt relieved, and the feeling of being controlled by Zhuowen disappeared. They knew that the mark that Zhuowen had left in their souls had been removed. Now, their lives were in their own hands. "Thank you, Master." Chun Changsheng respectfully cupped his hands to Zhuowen, then turned into a stream of light and left. Zhuowen did not stop him. He looked at Di Ling and Zhang Jiqing and said, "Now, you are free. Whether you stay or leave is up to you." Di Ling and Zhang Jiqing looked at each other, then knelt down and said, "We are willing to join the Wenshui Palace and serve the Wenshui Palace." "All right, when my wife comes out, you two will come with me to the Wenshui Palace." After that, Zhuowen did not wait for the two of them to react. His eyes fell onto the cave in the middle of the meteorite belt, and his eyes became very serious. He was certain that Chun Shue's cultivation had reached the peak of the life enlightening realm. If she swallowed the life or death pill, it would be easy for her to break through. The reason why Chen Shui had not come out was because Zhuo knew that Chen Shui was using the life and death energy of the life or death pill to comprehend the life and death energy. Perhaps she was preparing to break through to the life and death realm. Zhuo took a deep breath. If Chen Shui really broke through to the life and death realm, it would be a great thing for Zhuo. Time flew by, and another 3 months passed. The cave that had been silent suddenly exploded with a terrifying energy. Then, the entire meteorite belt was blasted away by the terrifying energy. The scene was like a fairy scattering flowers. Life and death, divine energy. Zhuowen's eyes were filled with excitement. With a wave of his sleeve, he blocked all the meteorites around him, but his eyes were fixed on the cave in the center. Chapter 2509. Contribution Hall Boom. With a loud explosion, the surrounding meteorite belt shattered into pieces, and Zhuo couldn't help but retreat under the force of this impact. He looked at the cave that had already turned into ruins in shock. He did not expect that Mu Qinshua's breakthrough would cause such a huge commotion. Although he had just reached the life enlightenment realm, because his doppelganger had reached the 3 extremities, his strength had surpassed Palace Master Wu Ju's life and death extremities. He was comparable to Sakyamuni. However, he was still pushed back by Mu Qinshua's breakthrough. It could be seen that Mu Qinshu was not ordinary. A clear and melodious phoenix cry resounded, and within the ruins of the Immortal's Cave, a dense golden flame burst out like a tide. The golden flames spread wider and wider. Zhuo and the others had to retreat to avoid the range of the golden flames. They could feel that the golden flames were extremely powerful. If they were entangled by the golden flames, they would be very unlucky. In the endless sea of golden flames, a fire phoenix spread its wings and soared into the sky. The countless stars in the sky were overshadowed by the fire phoenix. The vast aura was like a wave, wave after wave. Di Ling and Zhang Ziqing's faces turned pale. If it were not for Zhuo protecting the two of them, they would have been injured. After about an hour, the sea of golden flames gradually disappeared. The fire phoenix landed not far away from Zhuo. Then, the fire phoenix slowly transformed into a graceful and beautiful woman. This woman was Mu Qinshu. Chen Shui, you broke through the life and death extremities? Zhuo walked forward and happily grabbed Mu Qinshu's jade-like hand. Mu Qinshu's beautiful eyes were also filled with surprise. When she swallowed the life and death pill, she immediately broke through the life and death realm. Then, the life and death realm soared until she reached the peak of the life and death realm. When her cultivation reached the peak of the life and death realm, the effects of the life and death pill were almost used up. It was impossible for her to break through the life and death realm. At that time, Mu Qinshu was planning to come out of closed-door cultivation. However, what surprised Mu Qinshu was that the phoenix bloodline in her body seemed to have awakened at that moment. Then a strange energy entered her body. This energy was very vast and boundless. Her life and death realm that had been stagnant began to loosen at that moment. Then she took another step forward and broke through the life and death realm. Mu Qinshu recounted everything that had happened to Zhuo in full detail. After hearing this, Zhuo cautiously looked at Mu Qinshu. He felt that the phoenix bloodline in Chen Shui's body was not normal, and he also thought of the phantom of the 4 sacred beasts in the Door of Profundity. He always felt that the bloodline of the 4 sacred beasts should not be ordinary. Although the legends of the 4 sacred beasts have been circulating for a long time on the Heavenly Armor continent, they have never been seen before. However, since ancient times, the real 4 sacred beasts had never appeared. Even when Zhuo left the Heavenly Armor planet and came to the boundless starry sky of the 8 heavens, he still had not seen the real 4 sacred beasts. As for the 4 sacred beasts in the Door of Profundity, they were just virtual images condensed from the 9th layer Tao intent. They were not the real 4 sacred beasts. However, Zhuo knew that the virtual images of the four sacred beasts would definitely not appear in the door of profundity for no reason. In other words, on the other side of the door of profundity, the lair of the four sacred beasts should be the ninth heaven, he guessed. Let's go back to the Wen Shui Palace first. After saying that, Zhuo left with Mu Qinxue, Di Ling, and Zhang Jiqing. When Zhuo and the others returned to the Wen Shui Palace, they found that there were many bases in the starry sky around the Wen Shui Palace. These bases spread out with the Wen Shui Palace as the center. Looking from afar, it was like a bustling star field. Streams of light went in and out of this star field. It was very lively. At the center of this star field, the Wen Shui Palace was even more endless. Dense streams of light went in and out of the Wen Shui Palace from time to time, like a meteor shower. Looking at the starry sky around the Wen Shui Palace that had changed greatly, Zhuo couldn't help but be stunned, but then he felt relieved. After the end of the tournament, the selected forces should have set up their own bases in the places they chose. Zhuo had left for more than 50 years. After so many years, the Wen Shui Palace had naturally undergone earth-shaking changes. When Zhuo and the others landed in the square in front of the Wen Shui Palace, there were immediately cultivators who recognized Zhuo. Isn't this the Domain Master? The Domain Master is back. No way, he is the Domain Master? He is so young. Of course, before the Domain Master left, you weren't here, so you didn't see the Domain Master. I heard that the Domain Master has cultivated for less than 1,000 years, but he has achieved such achievements. This is a heaven-sent talent. Discussions sounded like a storm in the square. Zhuo didn't pay attention to these chaotic discussions. He just nodded slightly to the surrounding cultivators, greeted them, and entered the Wen Shui Palace. After entering the Wen Shui Palace, Zhuo found that the huge hall in the Wen Shui Palace was completely different. The throne formed by the huge white jade steps that Great Brahma had built at the front had been replaced by a huge screen. On the screen, there were various kinds of information, all of which were about missions. Zhuo's gaze landed on the mission at the top, which read, "Eliminate the rampant galactic bandit Gulan Duo of the Yin Galaxy. Mission contribution points, 1,000. There was a hint below the mission. Gulanduo's cultivation is at the 7th step of the Void Sky realm. He commits all kinds of evil and is extremely cunning. When encircling Gulanduo, it is best to join forces with 3 cultivators at the 7th step of the Void Sky realm. Otherwise, the failure rate is very high." In addition to this mission, Zhuo also saw other missions at the bottom of the screen, all of which offered rewards based on contribution points. In addition, Zhuo also saw some people posting personal information, such as urgently needing a certain divine medicine, how many contribution points they would use to trade, and so on. In this spacious mission hall, there was an endless stream of cultivators who came to the hall to accept missions to earn contribution points. Most of these contribution points were used to enter the Wen Shui Palace's cultivation area, while a small part was used to exchange for things they needed. When Zhuo entered the Wen Shui Palace, Magatama and Yuezu received the news and hurried over to greet Zhuo. The mission hall, which was originally noisy, became extremely quiet because of the appearance of Magatama and Yuezu. In the past 50 years, all the cultivators present recognized that Magatama and Yuezu were the Domain Lord's most valued left and right protectors. However, to everyone's surprise, after Yuezu and Magatama came out, they went straight to a white-clothed youth and respectfully bowed. Chapter 25:10. Big event. That young man in white looks very familiar. I seem to have seen him somewhere before. Of course he looks familiar. That's the Territorial Lord. Speaking of which, the Territorial Lord has left the Wen Snow Palace for 50 years and has only returned today. I'm afraid he doesn't know about the major events that have happened in the 8 heavens. Phew. Fortunately, the Territorial Lord is back. I hope our great Brahma domain will not be affected. In the hall, the discussion became more heated as Zhuo and the others went further away. After entering the depths of the One Snow Palace, Zhuan looked at Magatama and Yuezu with a dignified expression and said in a deep voice, "What happened?" The moment Yuezu and Magatama came out, Zhuan had already noticed that there was something wrong with their expressions. Yuezu and Magatama looked at each other and smiled bitterly. Yuezu took the lead and said, "Territorial Lord, I have good news and bad news in my hands. Which one do you want to hear first? Tell me the good news first." Zhuan said. Yuezu nodded and said with a relaxed expression, "The good news is that the One Snow Palace's cultivation area is operating normally, and we have implemented the plan that the Territorial Lord gave me back then. It is going very smoothly." Zhuan nodded. Seeing the current situation of the One Snow Palace, he knew that the contribution point system he promulgated back then had played a big role. The essence of this contribution point system was equality. If you were strong enough, you would naturally be able to obtain more contribution points. However, even if you were weak, it didn't matter. There were corresponding tasks of lower difficulty that were specially designed for weak cultivators. Because everyone had the opportunity to obtain contribution points under this system, no matter if it was a big sect or a small force, or a rogue cultivator who had no one to rely on, they all agreed with this contribution point system. Moreover, this system had also formed a healthy competition among the cultivators in the entire Heaven Domain, which was extremely beneficial to the development of the Heaven Domain. Only 50 years had passed, and there were not many advantages to be seen. However, as long as another few thousand or 10,000 years passed, Zhuan believed that the Great Fan Realm would produce many talents and become a truly powerful Heaven Realm. What's the bad news? Zhuan looked at Yuezu and asked. Yuezu glanced at Magatama beside him and immediately sighed. "Domain Lord, not long after you left when Shui Palace 50 years ago, there was extremely bad news from Six Desires' Heavenly Domain. We wanted to inform you at that time, but we couldn't contact you at all." Zhuan was a bit embarrassed. In order to experience the world of the two of them with Chen Shui and not be disturbed by others, naturally, he had turned off all communication devices on him. It was understandable that Yuezu couldn't contact him. What happened to the Six Desires' Heavenly Domain? Zhuan asked. Yuezu said, "The Lord of Six Desires' Heavenly Domain, Palace Master Wujua, has died." Six Desires' Palace was also destroyed. It is said that it was done by Sakyamuni. Zhuan's pupils shrank, and he said seriously, "Sakyamuni dared to kill Palace Master Wujua? Isn't he afraid of being attacked by the other Heavenly Domain Lords?" After becoming the Lord of Great Fan Realm, Zhuan also knew many of the hidden rules between Heavenly Domains. He knew that the 8 Heavenly Domains restrained each other. Once any Heavenly Domain Lord broke the balance, he would immediately be attacked by the other Heavenly Domain Lords. This was the consensus among the Heavenly Domain Lords. This was also why Sakyamuni, who was the strongest Heavenly Domain Lord, didn't even dare to touch the weakest Great Fan Realm. It was mainly because he was afraid that the other Heavenly Domain Lords would join forces to attack him. Even if Sakyamuni was the strongest Heavenly Domain Lord, he still wouldn't be a match for the other Heavenly Domain Lords. After all, Sakyamuni wasn't a Tao-confirming expert. Zhuan was different. He wasn't the Heavenly Domain Lord, so he could naturally challenge the Heavenly Domain Lord. If he won, it was natural for him to become the new Heavenly Domain Lord. The Heavenly Domain Lord was the strongest expert in the Heavenly Domain. Naturally, he had to accept the challenges of other living beings in the Heavenly Domain. If he couldn't even defeat other cultivators, the Heavenly Domain Lord should naturally give up his position. This was the consensus of the Heavenly Domain. Great Fan Realm immediately suppressed Luo Shun after he advanced to the Enlightenment Realm. In fact, he was afraid that with Luo Shun's talent, he would continue to advance and break through the Enlightenment Realm. At that time, he wouldn't be able to suppress Luo Shun at all. Great Fan Realm suppressed Luo Shun to strengthen his position, but he didn't expect that he would be destroyed by Zhuan in the end. Magatama suddenly said, "Domain Lord, after Palace Lord Wujua was killed, Sakyamuni left. After that, The other heavenly domain lords didn't do anything. Later on, we went to investigate and found. At this point, Magatama's eyes revealed a look of worry. Found what? Zhuowen asked. The lords of the Tusida celestial region, Yema celestial region, Limitless Light celestial region, and Mahesvara celestial region have mysteriously disappeared. Due to the disappearance of their lords, the cultivators within the 4 celestial regions have fallen into a state of chaos, Mo Tian said. What? Zhuowen stood up and his eyes were filled with shock. He suddenly recalled that the lords of the 4 heavenly domains, Palace Master Wujue, who was killed, and Sakura, who left, weren't they the 6 people who entered the door of profundity? Now, Palace Lord Wujue was killed, Sakyamuni returned to the Sakyamuni domain, and the other 4 went missing. Zhuowen didn't believe that Sakyamuni killed the 4 heavenly domain lords. Although Sakyamuni is strong, he can't kill 4 heavenly domain lords at the same time. Zhuowen quickly thought of the barrier on the other side of the door of profundity. Could it be that the 4 heavenly domain lords entered the 9th heaven on the other side of the barrier? But why didn't Sakyamuni go in? If it was really the 9th heaven, Sakyamuni must be more eager to enter the 9th heaven. After all, Sakyamuni is the one closest to the Tao-confirming realm. He is also one of the most promising Tao-confirming realm powerhouses among the 8 heavenly domain lords. However, not only did Sakyamuni not enter, but even Palace Lord Wujue also didn't enter. Moreover, Sakyamuni even killed Palace Lord Wujue. Zhuowen thought of the possibility of silencing Palace Lord Wujue. And Sakyamuni killed Palace Lord Wujue because of the door of profundity. In addition, since Sakyamuni didn't enter, it is very likely that the other side of the door of profundity isn't a good place. Thinking of this possibility, Zhuowen couldn't help but break out in cold sweat. If it is really as he guessed, the other side of the barrier is very likely to be a very terrifying place. Fortunately, he didn't enter the other side of the barrier. It's just that when he looked through the transparent barrier, he saw that the other side of the barrier wasn't a dangerous place, but a fairyland. I'm afraid that there's an extremely advanced illusion formation inside the barrier that I can't see through. Zhuowen sighed and muttered to himself. Relying on the information provided by Magatama, he basically guessed the general situation and felt very lucky. Besides this, is there something else? Chapter 25:11. Returning to the world of bones, Magatama nodded. 30 years ago, many strange beasts suddenly appeared in the 6 desires heavenly domain. These strange beasts specifically fed on humans, regardless of whether they were cultivators or mortals. They swallowed them on sight. Moreover, this kind of strange beast's reproductive ability is extremely terrifying. In just 30 years, more than half of the heavens in the 6 desires heavenly domain have been occupied by this strange beast. Most of the other cultivators in the 6 desires heavenly domain have left the 6 desires heavenly domain to seek refuge in other heavens. Zhuowen frowned slightly. Do you know where these strange beasts came from? How strong are they? Magatama said. We investigated and found that these strange beasts appeared out of nowhere. These strange beasts are not strong individually, only about 1 step in the void sky realm. However, there are too many of them. Moreover, their attacks are very coordinated. Even a cultivator at 8 steps in the void sky realm would die if they were caught in this group of strange beasts. Zhuowen frowned slightly. He felt that the appearance of these strange beasts was too coincidental. Could it be that these strange beasts were related to the door of profundity? Moreover, in order to prevent these strange beasts from leaving the 6 desires heavenly domain, the experts of other heavenly domains have already sealed off the exits of the 6 desires heavenly domain. Yuezu interrupted. All right, is the ruler of the Hua, Xia heavenly domain, Tai Ching, also missing? Zhuowen nodded and suddenly asked. Yuezu shook his head. Tai Ching of the Hua, Xia heavenly domain has always been very mysterious. Our spies can't enter the Hua Xia heavenly domain, so we still don't know what's going on with the ruler of the Hua Xia heavenly domain. Zhuowen didn't ask any more questions. He knew that Tai Ching must be safe and sound. Although he didn't have much contact with Tai Ching, he knew that this person was very scheming and was proficient in the 8 trigrams divination technique. He must have divined something ominous back then, so he didn't accept Palace Master Wu Jue's invitation to the 6 Desires heavenly domain. Domain Master. Every heavenly domain has a protective barrier activated by the heavenly domain's origin. I feel that the 8 heavenly domains haven't been peaceful recently. I think it's best that we activate the protective barrier in advance, Yuezu suggested. Zhuowen naturally knew about the domain protection barrier. This barrier was activated by the heaven domain's source energy. It was a powerful barrier that covered the entire heaven domain. Even a cultivator at the extreme life and death boundary would find it difficult to break through. It was extremely terrifying. All right, after I activate the domain barrier this time, I'll have to take a trip out. Chen Shui, you can stay in the 1 Snow Palace and manage the 1 Snow Palace for me. Zhuowen looked at Mu Chen Shui beside him as he spoke. Mu Chen Shui nodded. She did not ask why Zhuowen was going out, because she had already guessed it. She only reminded Zhuowen to be careful. Zhuowen did not waste any time and directly entered the deepest part of the 1 Shui Palace. There was an array in the deepest part of the 1 Shui Palace. This array was the array that activated the protective barrier. One only needed to take out the heaven domain origin and place it in. Zhuowen had already obtained the heaven domain origin when he cracked the Tower of Hanoi. At this moment, he waved his right hand and took out a small version of the Tower of Hanoi, placing it on top of the array formation. Instantly, a terrifying source energy soared into the sky like a heavenly pillar. Then, the source energy spread out and quickly enveloped the entire Great Brahma domain. This protective barrier was invisible and intangible, so it was usually very difficult to notice it. Only when some creatures or cultivators with ill intentions tried to invade, this protective barrier would immediately materialize and defend against the invaders. It was extremely convenient. After doing all this, Zhuowen looked at Yuezu and asked in confusion, "Where's Brother Purple Star? Why didn't I see him when I came back?" Yuezu said, "Lord Purple Star left the 1 Snow Palace 10 years ago. I heard that he went to look for the cultivation method of the 3 extreme realms. He said that when you came back, he would inform you, so you don't have to look for him." Zhuowen frowned slightly and could only let it go. He knew that Purple Star was a madman who pursued the pinnacle of martial arts. Back then, Purple Star's dream was to reach the 3 extreme realms. However, when Purple Star advanced to the 3 extreme realms and discovered that there were higher realms, he definitely wouldn't be satisfied. It was only a matter of time before he left the 1 Snow Palace. However, the fact that Purple Star left so soon made Zhuowen feel a little helpless. Although Zhuowen also wanted to find the cultivation method for the subsequent realms of the 3 extremes, he knew that he had too many things to do now. Once he was done here, he would also search for his martial Tao like Crepe Myrtle Star. Moreover, Zhuowen also wanted to know about the Door of Profundity. When the time came, he would probably have to go to the 6 Desires heavenly domain to see if the Door of Profundity was related to the strange beast that suddenly appeared. 3 days later, Zhuowen left the 1 Snow Palace while being sent off by Mu Qinshui, Yuezu, Magatama, and the others. Moreover, Zhuowen also saw Tong Chimei's figure in the farewell party. However, Tong Chimei seemed to have some misgivings and didn't come out to say hello. She just silently looked at Zhuowen. "Chimei, don't think too much. He already has a cultivation partner. You and he don't belong in the same world." Elder Waning Moon looked at the dazed Tong Chimei and sighed softly. Tong Chimei regained her calmness and said, "Master, I know. I didn't expect too much. In fact, during the Interstellar Tournament, I knew that the gap between us would grow bigger and bigger. When the time comes, he and I are destined to not belong in the same world. It's just that this day came so quickly." Elder Waning Moon nodded, but didn't know how to continue. After leaving the 1 Snow Palace, Zhuowen went straight to the spatial fault in the southern part of the star field. Back then, he was forced into the spatial fault by the Qinquan sect's ancestor Qin Changsheng and the Void Pierce Peak's ancestor Fu Yuz. In the end, he entered the skeleton world in this spatial fault. It was also in this skeleton world that Zhuowen met the Devourer King sealed in the skeleton world. The Devourer King had lived for much longer than him. Perhaps he knew something about the Door of Profundity. Moreover, he also wanted to ask about the Devourer world. Looking at the spatial fault before him, Zhuowen felt a myriad of emotions. He recalled the time when he was exhausted from running for his life due to the terrifying suction force of this spatial fault. Now, this spatial fault didn't affect him at all. Only now did Zhuowen understand the benefits of great strength. Zhuowen clenched his right hand and took out the king's sword. Terrifying death qi covered the surface of the king's sword, causing it to turn grayish-white. From afar, it looked like a bone sword. Rumble. With a swing of the sword, the spatial fault collapsed inch by inch. Space-time shattered, revealing a small world filled with skeletons. It was the skeleton world. Countless creatures in the skeleton world were shocked by this tremor. They all looked at the sky above the skeleton world. They felt that someone was attacking the skeleton world. The Devourer King sealed in the depths of the skeleton world slowly opened his eyes. His scarlet gaze penetrated the seal and landed on the outside world. When he saw a tall and straight young man in white, his pupils suddenly shrank. It's him? This kid has already reached the life enlightenment realm. How long has it been? The Devourer King muttered in disbelief. Chapter 25:12. Deducing the Sealing Array. How can this kid be so powerful and terrifying? Devourer King was dumbfounded. A single sword strike was enough to destroy the barrier around the bone world. This was a barrier laid down by the previous Devourer King. Even if it had been shelved for countless years, it shouldn't have been destroyed so easily. The moment the barrier shattered, Devourer King didn't even have time to react. The white-robed youth had already appeared before him, smiling at him. Devourer King, I trust you've been well since we last met. Zhuowen leaned against a stone pillar as he stared at Devourer King and said casually. Devourer King felt as if there was a blade on his back, and he couldn't sit still. If it was an ordinary life enlightening realm cultivator, he wouldn't be so uneasy. However, Zhuowen was able to shatter the starry sky with ease. Clearly, he wasn't an ordinary life enlightening realm cultivator. Devourer King still had the appearance of a sloppy man. When he saw Zhuowen looking at him, he forced a smile and said, Brother Zhuowen, I trust you've been well since we last met. Congratulations. How many years has it been since we last met? You've already reached the life enlightening realm. I was right. Zhuowen sneered in his heart. Devourer King had taken a fancy to his clone and wanted to possess it. Fortunately, Devourer King had mistaken his main body for Devourer and his clone for a human. In the end, Zhuowen was lucky enough to avoid being possessed. If Devourer King had directly possessed his human main body, Zhuowen wouldn't have been so lucky. Therefore, Zhuowen didn't have a good impression of Devourer King. Zhuowen slowly walked over, but his eyes casually looked around and said, Looks like you've put in a lot of effort these years. You've actually blasted a new hole in this sealing array. Zhuowen scanned the area with his spiritual consciousness and soon discovered several loopholes in the level 9 array, sealing the Devourer Monarch. He had fixed the only loophole back then. At the same time, he had also cut off Devourer King's life force, making it impossible for Devourer King to continue fighting against him. Now that Zhuowen was here again, he discovered several loopholes in the array. He knew that Devourer King had put in a lot of effort over the years to create several loopholes for him. Roar. Before Zhuowen could finish his words, Devourer King roared and charged at Zhuowen. Pitch-black energy gushed out of his hands, turning into huge black claws that grabbed at Zhuowen. Zhuowen calmly stood his ground. Devourer King and King, Zhuowen's king. Devourer King was sent flying. Blood flowed from his abdomen as he fell heavily to the ground. Although a large amount of vitality energy was flowing out of the hole and healing King Devourer's injuries, the speed of recovery was too slow. Zhuo Wenli ignored the Devourer King. Instead, he leisurely took out the 9 array discs made of beast bones. Then, he formed a hand seal and immediately found several loopholes in the seal. Back when he was still a level 7 Divine Array Master, he had already deduced the loopholes in the array. Now that he was a level 8 Divine Array Master, finding the loopholes was a piece of cake for him. Zhuowen changed his hand seal, and the loopholes were sealed up by Zhuowen. Without the life force, Devour King's injuries began to worsen. The terrifying death energy was like maggots that couldn't be dispelled. It continued to penetrate Devour King's body. Devour King's body trembled. He was in despair. In the previous exchange, he already knew that he was no match for Zhuowen in his current state. Perhaps if his true body wasn't sealed, he might be able to defeat Zhuowen. Unfortunately, his true body was completely sealed. He didn't even have a tenth of his strength left. He couldn't even take a single blow from Zhuowen. Devour King also realized that it was only Zhuowen's true body that fought him. If Zhuowen used his doppelganger that had awakened the bloodline of Devour King, he might be killed in a single blow. "You're not going to kill me?" Devour King asked tentatively. He knew very well that Zhuowen could kill him easily. However, Zhuowen didn't do that. He only injured him. "On the contrary, I'm going to save you," Zhuowen said with a faint smile. Devour King furrowed his brows and said coldly, "You mean you're going to help me undo this level 9 seal array?" Zhuowen nodded. He released the black-clothed Zhuowen and stood at the side to guard Devour King. As for his true body, he sat cross-legged on the ground and took out the 72 beast bone array discs. The 72 beast bone array discs combined with the other 9 beast bone array discs to form a total of 81 array discs. The beast bone array discs transformed into a terrifying storm that swept out in all directions. It was as though there were countless tentacles that were constantly probing the array. Zhuowen's powerful consciousness was attached to the beast bone array discs. He began to comprehend this level 9 seal array by following the energy of the beastbone array discs. Zhuowen's array, Dao, had already reached the pinnacle of the level 8 array Dao. In Zhuowen's opinion, as long as he could comprehend this level 9 sealing array and successfully decipher it, then his array Dao level would naturally advance to the level 9 array Dao level. At that time, he would officially become a level 9 array Dao Divine Master. Level 9 array Dao Divine Masters were definitely rare existences in the 8 heavens. Their numbers were probably even rarer than life Enlightenment Realm experts. Back then, there was a level 9 array Dao in the 6 Desires Palace. Zhuowen knew that there should be a level 9 array Dao Divine Master in the 6 Desires Palace. However, back then, he had fallen out with the 6 Desires Palace very quickly. Therefore, he didn't have the opportunity to meet the level 9 array Dao Divine Master. Later on, he heard that the 6 Desires Palace was destroyed. The level 9 array Dao Divine Master in the 6 Desires Palace should be dead. As for the Great Brahma Domain, they didn't even have a life and death realm cultivator, let alone a level 9 array Dao Divine Master. Seeing that Zhuowen was really pretending to deduce the array, the Devourer King sneered. "Even if you can really undo this seal array, I won't thank you. Moreover, if you have the intention of making me your servant, don't even think about it. You might as well kill me." Zhuowen didn't even turn his head as he replied, "Don't worry. I'm willing to undo this seal array. As for you, I will deal with you after I undo it." The Devourer King narrowed his eyes and didn't say anything else. He didn't think much of it. The Devourer King felt that Zhuowen was a little arrogant. However, he was a little fanatical. He knew that this kid was extremely talented in array Dao. Perhaps he might really be able to undo the seal array. As long as this kid could undo the seal array, he would be able to leave this damned place. As for Zhuowen, the Devourer King sneered in his heart. After he broke free from the seal array, his true body would be completely revealed. Although Zhuowen's strength was extraordinary, the Devourer King was more confident in his true body. Chapter 25:13. Promoted to a level, 9 Divine Formation Master. The Beastbone Array disc was constantly operating, and Zhuowen's divine sense was inextricably linked. He was inspecting every inch of the Grand Sealing Array. Zhuowen memorized every single detail of the sealing formation. At the same time, with the help of the Beastbone Disc Array and his own formation skills, he began to deduce the principles of the sealing formation. As time passed, the Devourer King sat on the side with an ugly expression. He tried his best to control his injuries while his resentment towards Zhuowen grew. The hole in the sealing formation had been fixed by Zhuowen. Now that he had lost the supply of vitality, it would be much harder for him to recover from his injuries. Furthermore, the king's sword in Zhuowen's hand contained the energy of death. The death energy was extremely tricky. If it weren't for Devourer King controlling the death energy with all his might, Zhuowen's injuries would have continued to worsen. It might even have affected his life. However, the Devourer King knew that this wasn't a long-term solution. If he wanted to recover from his injuries, he had to release his true body after the sealing formation was undone. Otherwise, he could only wait for death to come. Thinking of this, the Devourer King looked at Zhuowen with even more anxiety. He wanted nothing more than for Zhuowen to undo the sealing formation right now. However, he knew that this was only his imagination. 10 years later, the Devourer King leaned on the side on the verge of death. His eyes were drooping. The injuries on his body had worsened to 90% of his body. These terrifying injuries could take his life at any time. At this moment, the Devourer King didn't even have the strength to roll his eyes at Zhuowen. This was the first time he felt that death was so close to him. He could only curse Zhuowen's 18 generations of ancestors in his heart. Suddenly, Zhuowen, who was sitting cross-legged on the ground, abruptly opened his eyes. Blazing light shot out from his eyes like lightning, dazzling and dazzling. Zhuowen abruptly stood up, his sleeves fluttering even though there was no wind. Then, Zhuowen's right hand quickly pointed out. Instantly, the 81 Beastbone Array discs scattered in the air turned into 81 star dots, shooting into 81 different directions. Soon, the 81 Beastbone Array discs disappeared into the surrounding sealing array. Zhuowen's gaze turned increasingly solemn. Zhuowen's hands were forming hand seals at lightning speed. His speed was so fast that it was dazzling, but his gaze became more and more solemn and deep. Devouring King, who was originally sitting at the side on the verge of death, suddenly had a bright look in his eyes. His true body was trapped inside the sealing array, so he could clearly sense the changes in the sealing array. Although the sealing formation looked calm on the surface, King Devourer knew that the inside of the formation was like a raging sea, fiercely resisting the Beastbone formation. What surprised him even more was that every time the sealing array's power came into contact with the Beastbone formation, the Beastbone formation would evade in a roundabout way, looking for another opening. This cycle repeated itself, and naturally, some of the Beastbone formation discs slipped through the net and entered the sealing array. With the first opening, there would naturally be a second. More and more openings appeared in the sealing array. Then, King Devourer was pleasantly surprised to find that the array base of the sealing array began to shake. The moment the array base was shaken, the surrounding space began to tremble violently. The trembling grew more and more violent, as if the entire world was about to be destroyed. Many cultivators who had been trapped in the skeleton world for countless years felt the abnormality in the skeleton world. They were all frightened and confused, discussing what was going on in the skeleton world. Rumble. The trembling of the sealing array only lasted for an hour before it collapsed with a loud bang. The speed of the collapse was slow at first, but it suddenly became rapid and rapid. Finally, it spread to the entire sealing array, and then the ceiling array collapsed completely. The moment the ceiling array collapsed, Zhuowen waved his sleeve, and a huge black vortex appeared in the sky above the skeleton world. All the cultivators who were trapped in the skeleton world were sucked into the black vortex. The black vortex led to the outside world of the starry sky. When these cultivators appeared in the outside world, their eyes were filled with confusion, but they soon became excited. We're out. After being trapped in the skeleton world for countless years, we're finally out. I'm not dreaming, am I? I can't believe I can use my divine sense again. We're really out of that damned skeleton world. Thank God we're finally free. Although many cultivators did not know why they were suddenly out of the skeleton world, they still could not suppress the excitement in their hearts. Let's get out of here quickly. If the starry sky fault has a strong suction force again, we'll be back to that damn place again. Soon, some cultivators realized that they were still in a dangerous place and immediately took out their flying divine tools to escape. Haha, Zhuowen, you're quite compassionate. You even took care of these ants. But it doesn't matter. Compared to you, these ants are too weak. Today, I'll destroy you. An arrogant voice suddenly resounded from the starry sky fault. Then, the starry sky fault suddenly collapsed, and a huge monster appeared. Zhuowen floated in the starry sky, silently looking at the huge monster in front of him. He knew that this huge monster was the Devourer King. The Devourer King in front of him was very different from Zhuowen's clone. After Zhuowen's clone awakened the bloodline of the Devourer King, it was only about 10 feet tall and covered in golden scales. However, the Devourer King in front of him was different. The Devourer King's body was 10,000 feet tall, and the scales on its body were blood red. From afar, it looked like a strange beast covered in blood. It looked extremely strange. After the Devourer King's real body left the seal, it immediately roared into the sky. The terrifying roar caused a terrifying shockwave that radiated out for hundreds of millions of miles. Wherever the shockwave passed, planets would explode and living beings would perish. Zhuowen faced the terrifying shockwave without moving an inch. He only silently looked at the Devourer King in front of him. The moment the seal was broken, Zhuowen's array Dao had successfully advanced to Tier 9. Zhuowen knew that he would be a true Tier 9 array Dao master in the future. By then, setting up Tier 9 array Dao would be a piece of cake. You're very brave. How can you be so calm in the face of my real body? Chapter 25:14. Subduing King Devourer's white robe fluttered in the wind, and the black-clothed Zhuowen was standing beside him. He looked at Devourer King calmly and said, "It seems like you've lied to me a lot. Your strength isn't at the 9 steps void sky. You've probably reached the Dao realm, right? It's a pity." Devourer King didn't seem to care. He said, "After being sealed for so many years, my strength is indeed less than 10%. However, my strength is still comparable to an expert in the death realm. Even if an expert in the 2 extremities of life and death came here personally, he might not be able to take me down. This time, as long as I kill you, I'll find a place to cultivate in seclusion. Once my injuries are completely healed, I'll slaughter my way to the devouring clan in the great desolate heaven region and eliminate that bastard, the new king of the devouring clan." Speaking of the new king of the devouring clan, Devourer King's eyes were filled with bloodthirst. His voice was filled with hatred and murderous intent. Great desolate heaven region? Is it the 9th heaven region on the other side of the heavenly moat? Then, is the devouring world you mentioned a lie? Zhuowen's eyes lit up as he asked immediately. Devourer King sneered, "You are indeed a frog at the bottom of a well. You actually believe the story I made up. At that time, I just wanted to know if you were from the great desolate heaven region or not. Later on, I found out that you were just a pitiful worm wandering in the 8 heavens region. There was no risk in taking over your body. However, I didn't expect that a bastard like you would actually deceive me. when he thought of how Zhuowen had confidently said that the human body was a clone and the Devouring Clan's body was the main body, Devourer King's heart was filled with depression. It was because he had mistaken the primary and secondary that he failed to take over the body. In the end, he was suppressed by Zhuowen and even lost his most precious phagocytosis. However, he knew that he had to take everything back. No one could stop him. Zhuowen nodded. He tightened his grip on the king's sword and slashed out a terrifying sword chi. He said, "In that case, I'll capture you and force you to tell me the truth." Devourer King laughed. He casually swung his huge blood claw and dispersed the sword chi. He sneered, You're just a life-comprehending realm expert. No matter how extraordinary your life-comprehending realm is, in my opinion, you're just a life-comprehending realm expert. In my opinion, you're just a life-comprehending life realm expert. You're just a life realm expert. No matter how extraordinary your life-comprehending realm is, in my opinion, you is life-comprehending is life realm. Devouring King's voice had just sounded when he saw that Zhuowen was surrounded by misty purple fog. Soon after, Devouring King discovered that the starry sky around him had unknowingly turned into a boundless purple sea. Devouring King tried to break free from the purple sea, but he was shocked to find that everything was in vain. Because when he wanted to spread his wings and soar, he found that he was still spinning in place. To be more precise, his time was forever frozen at this point. Of you, what's your relationship with the space-time master? Devourer King looked at Zhuowen in shock. Unfortunately, Zhuowen didn't pay any attention to Devourer King. Instead, he stepped on the purple sea. Behind him, a purple sun slowly rose from the end of the purple sea. Devourer King's words came to an abrupt halt. He felt a terrifying energy crushing his body. As the purple sun rose higher, the energy grew stronger. Plop! Finally, when the purple sun rose to its highest point, Devourer King couldn't bear the terrifying energy. He lay on the ground, his body trembling. Bastard! How can this space-time ability be so terrifying? Break from me! Devourer King roared unwillingly. The scales on his body emitted a terrifying blood-red light. Then, an earth-shattering bestial roar echoed. Devourer King, who was lying on the ground, suddenly released his aura. Like a tide, he broke free from the space-time restriction of the space-time sea and pounced at Zhuowen. Zhuowen narrowed his eyes. He stretched out his right hand unhurriedly. He raised his index finger and slowly lowered it. The purple sun behind him fell rapidly. Rumble! A terrifying explosion resounded. Like a meteor, the purple sun smashed in front of Devourer King. At this moment, Devourer King's attention was focused on Zhuowen. The moment he was about to pounce on Zhuowen, he felt a heavy weight on his waist. Then he felt an intense pain. It was as though a mountain was pressing on his waist. A miserable shriek resounded. Soon after, Devourer King was smashed into the depths of the purple sea by the purple sun. When the space-time sea gradually receded, Devourer King was like a pile of mud, lying on the starry sky. He was on his last breath. Although Devourer King's true strength was unfathomable, it was a pity that he had been sealed for too long. His strength had been greatly depleted. At this moment, he was only at the death realm. Devourer King's current strength was only slightly stronger than Great Brahma. Compared to many experts in the life and death realm, he was much weaker. Zhuowen could kill Great Brahma in a single move. It would be strange if Devourer King was a match for Zhuowen. How is this possible? How can your strength be so terrifying? Devourer King roared crazily. In his heart, he was starting to regret. It was no wonder that Zhuowen could release the seal so easily. It turned out that this kid's strength was so strong. Just a single move from him was enough to injure him. However, Devourer King was unwilling to accept this. His strength had been greatly depleted. His good mood from escaping was instantly destroyed by Zhuowen's defeat. Zhuowen slowly walked in front of Devourer King. With a flip of his right hand, The huge phagocytosis expanded to 10,000 zhong in size. It pressed down on Devourer King, causing Devourer King to spit out a mouthful of blood. He almost fainted. Devourer King, you only have one choice now. Become my servant, Zhuowen said indifferently. Regaining his senses, Devourer King glared at Zhuowen and said coldly, I am the king of the Devourer clan. You want me to submit to you? Dream on. Let me finish. I don't want you to be my servant forever. I only want you to stay for 1,000 years. After 1,000 years, you can leave or stay. It's up to you, Zhuowen continued. Devourer King immediately hesitated. If he was asked to be Zhuowen's servant forever, he naturally wouldn't be willing. However, if it was 1,000 years, he could consider it. After all, 1,000 years was just a blink of an eye in his eyes. Zhuowen revealed a smile. He knew that Devourer King wouldn't be subdued so easily. Hence, he was smart enough to give an appropriate time limit. After all, Devourer King had cultivated for countless years. It wasn't easy for him. Furthermore, Devourer King still wanted to take revenge. He definitely wouldn't want to die like this. Sure enough, Devourer King thought for a while and agreed coldly. However, you can't order me around as you wish. You can only have an equal relationship with me, not a master-servant relationship. Zhuowen smiled faintly and said, Of course. However, you can't refuse my orders. Otherwise, I will kill you. Seeing Zhuowen agree, Devourer King relaxed. Then, Zhuowen signed a contract with Devourer King. The punishment of the contract was very binding on Devourer King. Zhuowen wasn't worried that Devourer King would break the contract. Moreover, Zhuowen had already planned to subdue Devourer King. Since Devourer King wasn't a creature from the 8 heavens, he definitely knew something about the 9th heaven. He might even know something about the Door of Profundity. Hence, his main purpose in subduing Devourer King was to learn more about the world outside the 8 heavens from Devourer King. Of course, after learning that Devourer King had the strength to corroborate his Tao, Zhuowen was even more determined to subdue Devourer King. Chapter 25:15. The Great Desolate Heavenly Realm and the Xiemi Heavenly Realm. By the way, what you told me about the devouring world was a lie, right? Zhuowen stared at the Devouring King. A light flickered in the Devouring King's eyes as he nodded. Yes. Back then, my goal was to seize your body, so I didn't tell you the truth. The devouring world doesn't exist, but our devouring clan does. Your devouring clan exists in the Great Desolate Heavenly Realm. Then, tell me more about this so-called Great Desolate Heavenly Realm. Zhuowen said indifferently. The Devouring King glanced at Zhuowen and didn't refuse. The Great Desolate Heavenly Realm is actually one level higher than the 8 heavenly realms. It's the true origin of this universe. The 8 heavenly realms are big enough, right? However, compared to the Great Desolate Heavenly Realm, it's nothing. Moreover, the Great Desolate Heavenly Realm's heavenly Tao source is many times richer than the 8 heavenly realms. In the Great Desolate Heavenly Realm, experts who have reached the 9th step of the illusionary heavenly realm are too common, and Tao-confirming experts can be found everywhere. It's said that there are even heaven-breaking experts in the legends, but I've never seen them before. Those experts have already transcended beyond the starry skies, and their traces are ethereal. They're not existences that we can touch. Speaking of heaven-breaking experts, the Devouring King's eyes were filled with eagerness and yearning. The heaven-breaking realm was a realm that countless creatures in this universe yearned for even in their dreams. Zhuowen pondered for a moment, then said, Since the Great Desolate Heavenly Realm exists, do you know how to get there? The Devouring King glanced at Zhuowen and sneered. The Great Desolate Heavenly Realm is a taboo for you human cultivators. Once a human enters the Great Desolate Heavenly Realm, they will definitely be surrounded and killed by the creatures in the Great Desolate Heavenly Realm, or they will become pitiful slaves. Zhuowen was stunned. He stared at the Devouring King and asked, The Great Desolate Heavenly Realm is a taboo for the human race? Why do you say that? Zhuowen didn't really believe it. If the great desolate heavenly realm was the ninth heaven, how could it be so against the human race? The devouring king cast a sidelong glance at Zhuowen and mocked, "You're really ignorant. You've already reached the life comprehension realm. You should know that there's a natural chasm at the end of the starry sky, right?" Zhuowen nodded, but didn't say anything. In the past, the heavenly moat wasn't the great desolate heavenly domain. Instead, it was the Xianmi heavenly domain, which the cunning humans split from the great desolate heavenly domain. Seeing that Zhuowen was still confused, the Devourer King patiently explained. After listening to the Devourer King's explanation, Zhuowen finally understood the whole story. According to Devourer King, the primitive heavenly domain was the true core of the universe. There were countless races in the primitive heavenly domain. The primitive heavenly domain was divided according to the strength of the race. The devouring clan was famous in the great desolate heavenly domain. A long time ago, it used to be one of the top 10 clans in the great desolate heavenly domain, the peak clan of the entire great desolate heavenly domain. However, due to the internal strife and the fact that there weren't many of them to begin with, the devouring king had gradually declined. Now, they could only be considered below average in the great desolate heaven realm. The name of the devouring king in front of him was Bloodscale, the previous king of the devouring clan. Later on, a new king of the devouring clan schemed against him. Bloodscale was severely injured and exiled to the deathly, silent outer space. Moreover, it was under the condition that his devouring king true body was sealed. Originally, Bloodscale thought that he would continue to wander in the lonely outer space. Because his vitality was sealed, he couldn't change his direction or fly. He could only go with the flow. However, he accidentally stumbled into a fault in the outer space. Bloodscale's true body was in the depths of the fault and turned into a huge skeleton world. Originally, Bloodscale didn't know anything about the fault in the outer space. However, he gradually discovered that there were human cultivators who fell into the fault and into the skeleton world. After discovering the human cultivators, Bloodscale was extremely nervous. He thought that he had fallen into the human race's headquarters, the Xianmi heavenly domain. Later on, he discovered that he was wrong. From the words of the human cultivators who fell into the skeleton world, he knew that they weren't cultivators from the Xianmi heavenly domain. They were from the so-called 8 heavenly domains. Bloodscale didn't know much about the 8 heavenly domains. Because the outer space where the 8 heavenly domains were located was too barren, Bloodscale didn't specifically inquire about the 8 heavenly domains. However, he was, after all, a creature from the great desolate heaven realm. He knew that there was not only a natural moat in front of the Xianmi heavenly domain, but also an extremely inferior outer space. On the other side of this inferior outer space was the great desolate heaven realm. This was deliberately set up by the Xianmi heavenly domain to prevent the great desolate heaven realm from invading. Zhuowen's face was unsightly. If what Bloodscale said was true, wouldn't the 8 heavenly domains become the cannon fodder of the Xianmi heavenly domain? Once the great desolate heaven realm invaded the 8 heavenly domains, it would be a great disaster for the 8 heavenly domains. He finally knew that the ruler of the heavenly domains, the 9th heaven, was the Xianmi heavenly domain. You said that the human race split from the great desolate heaven realm? Why did the human race split from the great desolate heaven realm? Zhuowen asked in surprise. Bloodscale shook his head and said, "As for the specific reason, it's too long ago, so I'm not too clear about it. I only know that before the human race split from the great desolate heaven realm, the human race was the most terrifying race in the great desolate heaven realm. Even the witch race, the strongest race in the great desolate heaven realm, was only the second strongest race in the human race's glory. Later, I learned that the division of the human tribe seemed to be due to some disagreement with the Wu tribe. It seemed to involve the great ancestor of sorcery. Of course, this is just hearsay. You should know the details from the human tribe when your cultivation is higher." Zhuowen was confused. After all, he was still in the 8 heavenly domains. Whether it was the Xianmi heavenly domain or the great desolate heaven realm, he didn't know anything about it. As for what Devouring King had just said, he didn't know much about it. However, Zhuowen knew that this should be the secret of the great desolate heaven realm and the Xianmi heavenly domain. At least, as an outsider, he wasn't qualified to know about it. Therefore, he didn't pay much attention to it. You said that you were exiled to the outer space by the Devouring Clan. In other words, the great desolate heaven realm and the outer space have a passage that connects? Zhuowen asked. Bloodscale nodded and said, the energy in the outer space is very weak. Dao, confirming experts, can easily tear a hole and enter the outer space. However, the outer space doesn't have any energy, so it's hard to stay there for a long time. I know what you want to say. The outer space of the 8 heavenly domains is very secretive. If you don't know the location in advance, it's very difficult to find the 8 heavenly domains. If it weren't for my good luck, I wouldn't have been able to enter the outer space vault of the 8 heavens. Chapter 25:16. Secret news: the creatures of the ancient desolate heavenly realm might not know the location of the 8 heavens. But Zhuowen knew that many human cultivators in the Xianmi heavenly realm must know. Zhuowen thought of the Dao confirming realm master who died in the blood-red cliff. He didn't know if this master was a cultivator from the Xianmi heavenly realm or a native of the 8 heavens. Oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you that the ancient desolate heavenly realm also has a passage that leads directly to the 8 heavens. But that passage was sealed countless years ago by the Almighty of the Xianmi heavenly realm with the Door of Profundity. The Door of Profundity is extremely mysterious and is extremely effective against non-human cultivators. Even the Almighty of the ancient desolate heavenly realm are extremely afraid of the Door of Profundity, let alone breaking it open. If human cultivators were to attack it, it would be much easier because the Door of Profundity doesn't defend against human cultivators, but the alien races of the ancient desolate heavenly realm. Speaking up to here, Bloodscale sighed softly and said, back then, I also tried to find the Door of Profundity in the ancient desolate heavenly realm to try my luck and enter the 8 heavens. However, the Door of Profundity is extremely hidden, so in the end, I couldn't find it and could only leave it unsettled. Zhuowen's face suddenly changed. He was all too familiar with the Door of Profundity. Back then, he found it in the 6 Desires heavenly realm. Later, in order to capture him, Palace Master Wujua gathered the lords of the other heavens and jointly broke open the Door of Profundity. Later, Yuezu also said that Palace Master Wujua was killed by Sakyamuni, and the 4 lords of the heavens, Yemazi, Xiaoyaozi, Immeasurable Photon, and Old Lord Tusida, mysteriously disappeared. The 6 Desires heavenly realm was invaded by a strange beast. Now, connecting this to what Bloodscale said, Zhuo more or less understood the general situation. It seems that what Bloodscale said is not wrong. The other side of the Door of Profundity is definitely the great desolate heavenly realm. Out of curiosity, Old Lord Tusida and the other 3 stepped into the great desolate heavenly realm. But they didn't expect that it wasn't the 9th heaven they dreamed of, but the great desolate heavenly realm that was full of hatred towards the human race. Sakyamuni was probably a cautious person, so she didn't enter the barrier rashly. In addition, Sakyamuni's ambition was not small. When he found out that Tusida Elder had left, he had set his sights on the heavenly domain origin of the other heavens. Therefore, he had killed Palace Master Wujua immediately, wanted to seize the heavenly domain origin of the 6 Desires heavenly domain. And because the Door of Profundity had been blasted open, the invasion of the 6 Desires heavenly realm by strange beasts was also a reasonable explanation. Thinking of this, Zhuowen felt a little irritated. He knew that the other side of the Door of Profundity really was the great desolate heavenly realm. As time passed, more and more strange races would enter the 8 heavens, and there might even be Tao-confirming powerhouses. When that time came, it would really be a huge disaster for the eight heavens. Bloodscale's ability to read people's expressions was not small. Seeing Zhuan's strange expression, he asked, "You know about the Door of Profundity?" Zhuan didn't answer directly, but asked in a deep voice, "You also said that the starry sky energy of the eight heavens is extremely scarce. Would the powerhouses of the great desolate heavenly realm be interested in the eight heavens?" Bloodscale sneered. "The eight heavens are nothing in the eyes of true powerhouses. They wouldn't even pay attention to them. But on the other side of the eight heavens is a natural mode, and on the other side of the natural mode is the Xianmi heavenly realm." Zhuan became more and more gloomy. Although Bloodscale didn't say it explicitly, Zhuan knew that the eight heavens would definitely be noticed by the powerhouses of the great desolate heavenly realm because of the geography of the eight heavens. This was a necessary place to invade the Xianmi heavenly realm. "What? You found the Door of Profundity?" Bloodscale narrowed his eyes and asked. Zhuan took a deep breath and said, "Yes, 50 years ago, I found the Door of Profundity. Later, it was blasted open by the combined efforts of the Lords of the Heavens." Bloodscale's expression immediately became serious. "Then your eight heavens are really finished. You said that the entrance of the Door of Profundity is extremely well hidden. In these 50 years, I haven't heard of any foreign powerhouses appearing. There shouldn't be any powerhouses entering the eight heavens so quickly, right?" Zhuan said in a deep voice. Bloodscale nodded. "The entrance of the Door of Profundity is indeed well hidden, but paper can never wrap fire. Once a true powerhouse enters the eight heavens, the human race of the eight heavens will all be finished. This is not an exaggeration." Zhuan frowned slightly. Although he wasn't a great saint who cared about the world, he was still a member of the eight heavens. Now that he knew that the eight heavens were about to face a calamity, he naturally had a compassionate heart. "If you want to protect the eight heavens, I think you have to pass this news to the Xianmi heavenly domain. Only by having the Xianmi heavenly domain's experts come and repair the Door of Profundity will you be able to avoid this calamity. However, I feel that this possibility is very small." Bloodscale gloated. Zhuan felt helpless. He wasn't a cultivator of the Xianmi heavenly domain, nor was he a Tao affirmation expert. He couldn't cross the chasm at all. Even if he had the ability to cross the chasm, it was still unknown whether the Xianmi heavenly domain would believe his words. However, Zhuan had the Devourer King's clone, so he wasn't too worried about himself. If the eight heavens really suffered a great calamity, Zhuan would take all of his friends and family into the Devourer King's inner world and appear as the Devourer King. As long as it wasn't a human cultivator, Zhuan believed that the experts of the great desolate heavenly domain wouldn't do anything to him. Of course, that was the last resort. He had no choice but to protect the people he knew. However, there was still time. Therefore, he would still think of ways to prevent this calamity from happening. "Let's go. Follow me to a place first." Zhuan didn't say anything else. Instead, he brought Bloodscale and left the starry sky fault. This time, Zhuan wanted to go to the northern universe. When he first arrived at the border of the northern universe from the eastern universe, Heavenly Devil Island, he encountered the danger zone formed by the battle between Mu Qinxue and Great Brahma. It was also because of this danger zone that Zhuan accidentally entered a strange, small world of ice and snow. In the center of that world of ice and snow, Zhuan met Ma Yujia for the first time. Not only that, but he also saw countless strange beasts in the ice tower of that small world. At the top of the ice tower, he saw the devouring race and the dragon race, as well as Ma Yujia, who was sandwiched between the two beasts. Back then, Zhuan was very surprised by the strange beasts sealed in the ice tower. He had never seen any of them before. Now, he knew that these strange beasts were most likely from the great desolate heavenly domain. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.